Hey everybody, it is stinking hot today. The cicadas are outside, screaming their heads off. Contin right in the door, feeling icky. I'm sure you are, my man. You've got the COVIDs. Build up that immunity so when the next strain comes in, you'll be hyper immune. You'll be able to put up shields and barriers. Ligon to Z, good to see you, my man. Salute to you too, my friend. It is the type of heat that I am experiencing right now is so uncomfortable that I can't even really describe it. I went outside. Wednesdays are my me days. You know, this is how I call it. Like every other day is like a work day or a chore day, or there's something else about it. But yet today was it. The Wednesdays are I go get a nice plate of wings, half price wings down the street, right? Maybe get some ice cream, right? Spend some time on the beach. It's just like the me day, and that's how I build it. And boy, was it terrible. Boy, was the me day an awful experience. I would have been better off just staying at home. I don't have air conditioning because I don't want to pay for it, right? I don't want to pay for it. I have fans, and those fans are at full bore. So if you hear a slight hissing in the background, please understand that if I don't have that hissing in the background, I will literally die. Yesterday, I straight up did some chores around the house, and I was sweating so hard that I think I drank like 5 gallons of water. That might be a bit hyperbolic, but just like unbelievable heat happening here. This is a massive heat wave. And of course, because this is the channel that it is, right? When we get a heat wave like this, it always reminds me, soon heat waves like this are going to start really knocking people out, right? Start actually killing people in serious ways. That we are actually in a situation like this is the thing that people, I think, misunderstand about climate change and about the heat waves that are going to come and about all this. It only takes one day, right? Like, it only takes one day. You know, it doesn't need to be the case that, like, it's this consistent, persistent, up at this high level of, like, 40-degree heat for 3 months. Like, that's not what it's going to be. It's going to be, all it's going to take is one day. Just one, like, spoop, up the spike comes, right? And if your average is steadily going up, which is what we're experiencing, then the likelihood of a spike up is so much more likely. Here we are, science, right? This is shiningscience.com. Yeah, DJ, good to see you, man. I feel like this is the tone of the day, my man. I think we're all not feeling great. I'm not feeling great because of the heat. I didn't get a good night's sleep. Like, the heat is so bad. We got a fella in the chat who has the COVIDs, right? Ligon to Z, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like you're always in a state of not feeling good. I'm messing with you, bud. I'm messing with you, my man. Earth has just seen its hottest 3-month spell on record. The global average temperature for June, July, and August was 16.77 degrees Celsius. That's 62.19 Fahrenheit, beating the previous record set in 2019 by almost 0.3 of a degree. Earth has just experienced its hottest 3-month period on record by a significant margin. The global average temperature for June, July, and August was 16.77 degrees Celsius, a whopping 0.66 degrees Celsius above average, according to the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service. That temperature beat the previous record set in 2019. Climate breakdown has begun, said Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, in a statement. Our climate is imploding faster than we can cope with extreme weather events hitting every corner of the planet. Surging temperatures demand a surge in action. Last month was the hottest August in records, going back to 1940, and the second hottest month ever after this July, when the average global temperature was 16.95. Ocean temperatures have been even warmer, averaging 20.98 degrees Celsius in August, the new hottest month on record. Both July and August were estimated to be 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, temporarily reaching the limit on yearly average warming established by the Paris Agreement. The average for the year to date is only 0.01 degrees Celsius behind 2016, which holds the record for the hottest year, with El Niño, a periodic buildup of warm water in the eastern Pacific, expected to keep boosting global temperatures. This summer, in the northern hemisphere, has seen heat waves fuel the EU's largest ever wildfires in Greece, and temperatures of up to 47 degrees Celsius, that's 117 degrees Fahrenheit, resulting in thousands of estimated deaths. Heat records have also been set in the United States, where more than 60 million people are currently under heat alerts. It has been even hotter in Asia, where China saw its highest temperature ever recorded at 52.2 degrees Celsius. That's 126 degrees Fahrenheit. In the southern hemisphere, where winter is just ending, Antarctic sea ice is 12% below its average extent, a record low for this time of year. 2023 is likely to be the warmest year people have ever experienced, says Samantha Burgess at the Copernicus Climate Change Service. A warmer world means more impacts from the more intense and frequent extreme events such as the heat waves, wildfires, and flooding seen this summer. The UK is exposed to the increased climate risk from a warmer world, and the summer we've just experienced is likely to be one of the coolest summers over the next decades. Wonka, wonk, 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 wonk. And what are we doing? Huh? What are we doing? We're going to go ahead and elect the climate change denier. That's what we're going to do. Climate change is not a problem, you guys, right? That's why we're electing a climate change denier up here in Canada, right? Like literally the Conservative Party, 50% of the party doesn't acknowledge that climate change exists. Right, so up here in Canada, while we are experiencing quite literally the hottest months on record, only beating the previous record, which was set the year previously. Have you been noticing that we're just beating record? Yeah, have you been noticing how it's been happening? But climate change, that's not a thing. That's not real. That's why we're going to elect a climate change denier to be the Prime Minister of Canada. Wonka, wonk, 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 wonk. We are a smart and intelligent person. Ligon Z writes, picked a lot of apples yesterday, was sweating buckets, bitten by mosquitoes. Probably going to have to pick some more later. Well, that's nice. That's good hard work. And are you getting apples out of the deal? Or are you doing it for the money? Are you doing it for the money? Eric, good to see you. Radio Halifax, absolute pleasure to see you. Radio Halifax has rain out there. Yep. Trudeau, I mean, this is how intelligent our leadership is going to be, you guys. Pierre Poilievre goes viral for calling Justin Trudeau and his father Marxists. I can't think of a better way to just tell me you are illiterate on the subject of Marxism without telling me you're illiterate. Just find the perfect way to inform everyone that you are dumb. Even non-Marxists, even liberals, are sitting there going what? No. What are you talking about? Canada's opposition leader is going viral once again, this time aligning Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his father Pierre with anti-capitalistic beliefs. A video of Pierre Poilievre going door-knocking was posted to social media, and in it he can be heard calling the Trudeaus Marxists, a term used to describe a supporter of the political and economic theories of the 19th century philosopher Karl Marx. I love that that the news feels the need to be just so you guys are aware, okay? Marxists are people who follow the theories of the guy Karl Marx, right? Just so we're all on the same page. Like, it really is a shame that we didn't include in our education system the idea of educating people, right? It's really interesting how we just sort of forgot that. We got all these people in a room and talked to them for 12 years, but we actually forgot to educate them. It's really wild. It's really wild. Ligand to Z, we've got 2 different types of apple trees in our backyard. One is sweeter than the other. Don't know the exact species, though. That's nice. That's lovely, my man. One time, I had the absolute privilege of moving out. When I moved out east, I moved into a place, and there was a vineyard in the backyard. There's a vineyard in the backyard, and we got to be in the vineyard. And I got to pick grapes, and I made a wine. A very terrible wine from those grapes. I ruined a perfectly good grape juice. But it was a lot of fun to do it. And I had a good time doing it. And so going out apple picking sounds absolutely wonderful, my man. Eric, talking about Marxism, my friend and I are going to start a new podcast. We were going to go through different theories and read those works and discuss them as we go through them. And of course, it's the same friend talking about where I was introducing him to Marxism. Good for you, man. Even as a process for yourself, right? Like even as a way to increase your own knowledge. That's a great thing to do, I think. Right? What a wonderful idea. So I really encourage people to do this sort of thing. Grinning guys, I have a terrible wine, Ree. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Well done. Well done. Sir. So, in positive news, right? We just read some very harrowing articles there about the nature of the climate change struggle and how we're not doing anything about it. It's possibly the reason why 53% of young people prefer socialism over capitalism. This is from Medium. Why young people prefer socialism. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in socialism among young people. A 2018 poll by the Pew Research Center found that 53% of millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, have a positive view of socialism, compared to 39% of baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964. The shift in opinion is due to a number of factors, including the perceived failures of capitalism, the rising cost of living, and the growing inequality in society. And hey, let's not forget about climate change, right? Let's not forget about how the system of capital is generating a climate change crisis that it's not rationally responding to. Huh? How about that? Jahone writes, did everyone like the stream? Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, hit the bells, hit the whistles. Think about donating, right? Even $1 makes me feel good about myself, you guys. If you donate to the Patreon, it gets you into the Discord. You can continue communicating with people. And also, most importantly, when I get pulled off these platforms, you can find out where I'm going to go and how I'm going to continue doing this work. And then more importantly than all of that, tell somebody I exist. Tell your wife, tell your sister, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Tell the world. Stand upon the top of the mountain and scream my name into the universe. I mean, maybe don't do that. That's a bit dramatic. But the failures of capitalism. One of the main reasons why young people are turning to socialism is because they believe that capitalism has failed them. Yeah, no shit. Like, no shit. Gata Najara on Twitch says, I wonder about the details of this poll. Chances are good that near the bottom, they'll go into how the poll was actually done. Usually that's the case. So we'll find out as we go along. I very steadily, like I used to have that sort of opinion of like, polls, what a bunch of bullshit. Polls are usually actually quite accurate. It's interesting, right? Like the system of polling. And if it was in the whole theory that like, oh, they're just getting the numbers that they want to get, it doesn't actually work that way. Because if you try to do that, you try to just manipulate polling data in order to get the numbers that you want, well, then when it doesn't work out, people get very skeptical of you and stop paying attention to you. And it happens very quickly. Like, that's one of the things that happened in, if you recall the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, right? All of the polls and the media was like, Clinton, 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 right? And then it was wrong. Trump won. Right? And so what that did is it made those organizations who were calling the election for Hillary the entire time, made them look like idiots, and they lost a lot of support. Right? And it happened very quickly. They lost a lot of support very, very quickly. And there were, and the polling services and the people who were saying, no, Trump's probably going to win this thing, right? It's looking like it's going to go Trump, or the ones that were willing to say, we don't know, it's so close, right? Which there were a handful of people at that time saying, we don't know, we're going to be on the fence about it. We're not calling it for Hillary, but we're not calling it for Trump, right? And so they're like, too close to call. There was one fellow specifically, and I'm blanking on his name, and so I hate it when this happens, but it's like Nathan, and his website. That's annoying. But basically, there's this pollster who basically comes out of nowhere because he was saying, like, no, the polling data is actually showing you that it's a Trump election. And so these people are Nate Silver. That's right, Nate Silver. So pollsters are heavily incentivized to be accurate, right? Because if they try to play this game of, like, let's manipulate public opinion and tell people that it's not the truth, well, it always blows up in their face. Always, 100% of the time. And the biggest reason why pollsters and poll people don't try to do this is because the capitalists themselves rely on this data, right? That the capitalists don't know what's going on, right? The capitalists are as clueless as we are. They get their information from who? Pollsters, right? That's why they hire them. That's why they commission them. That's why they use them, is because they're like, we want to know what's going on. We want to know for real what's going on so that we can manipulate people to buy our shit, so that we can change public opinion through other methods, right? But the polls themselves are usually very accurate because if they're not, the capitalists will abandon them. And if the capitalists abandon them, then who's paying, right? Then who's paying? So they're heavily incentivized to be accurate. Right? And that's not to say that polls are not manipulative in other ways, right? That polls usually are manipulative in through methods of omission, right? They just won't give people the option to select something, right? That people themselves need to. So they'll give them three options, and of course, of those three options, one of them is not going to be Karl Marx is the greatest, right? Or like communism is good. Like, they're not even going to talk about that. So those are the methods by which polls can be manipulative, but more or less, I do think that polls are fairly accurate because they're heavily incentivized to be accurate by the very system of capital that benefits from the existence of the polls in the first place. And that's why, yeah, Nate Silver is a great example of just like capitalists, like the capitalist class themselves will be like, okay, Nate Silver, you're the guy, obviously. These people, sure, they said that, but who cares? So we're going to put our money this way instead of this way. And that's significant. That's not an insignificant thing. So, back to the article in question. The failures of capitalism. One of the main reasons why young people are turning to socialism is because they believe that capitalism has failed them. Like, no shit. My personal story is as simple, like my personal position is, why should anyone bother to work ever for any reason whatsoever? Like, once you have your basic bills paid, like once you've got your rent paid, once you've got the absolute bare bones basics paid, why should you bother working? Right? You're not going to get a house, you're not getting kids, right? You're not getting a retirement. Right? Like, what's the point? You might as well work the absolute barest of the minimum that's required for your base survival in the capitalist system, and then take the amount of time that you get, the amount of time that you save, not sacrificing yourself to this death cult that's obviously abandoned you right away, and just enjoy yourself. Just enjoy the time you have. Right? Enjoy your youth. Enjoy your middle age. Enjoy being elderly. Like, enjoy your life in the position that you're at. Because the capitalists, their whole pitch is, yes, you're sacrificing your life to us right now, but later you're going to get big benefits. Later you're going to be able to get freedom, and later you're going to be able to do that. Well, later never comes anymore, and we know it. It's just facts, right? Hard by the numbers. And all these people walking around being like, you gotta take control of your life and become the author of your own fate. Well, when you start actually taking control of your life and being the author of your own fate, what do they say? Well, not like that. You're supposed to sell yourself to capital. Like, no. Don't sell yourself to capital. Like, straight up. The capitalist goal is to waste your life for nothing. And it's obvious now. Right? It's obvious. The article continues. They see a system that is increasingly rigged in the favor of the wealthy and powerful, right? So accurate, while the middle class and poor are struggling to get by. They see a system, this is in bold no less, they see a system that is destroying the environment and creating a climate crisis. And they see a system that is exporting war and instability around the world. So it looks like the millennials are accurate in the way that they think about the world. Well, at least a percentage. What's the percentage? 53%. So that means 47% of millennials are still dimwits. The rising cost of living. And that makes sense given that we're voting conservative. Another reason why young people are turning to socialism is because of the rising cost of living. The cost of housing, education, healthcare, and other basic necessities have been increasing faster than wages for many years. This has made it increasingly difficult for young people to afford to live on their own and start a family. Yeah, so why work? The growing inequality. The gap between the rich and poor has been growing in recent decades. The top 1% earners in the United States now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This level of inequality is unprecedented in American history. Young people are particularly aware of this inequality, and they are looking for a system that will address it. Milo, buddy. Sorry, guys. My dog had just like a big tumble right there. Are you okay, buddy? You okay, buddy? That was really stupid what I just watched you do. Right? Pretty dumb. Pretty dumb. Hey, Milo. 1 second, guys. You want some peanut butter? Let's get you some peanut butter, my man. Treats for Milo. Treats for Milo. Treats for Milo. Treats for Milo. Come here, buddy. There you go. Oh, my dog is getting blind. He's literally blind now. Like, I watched him run headfirst into a wall the other day. Not run, but like he just walked into a wall. Yeah. Radio writes, I'm daily bombarded by pleas to work extra hours. My answer is always no. Yeah, because why? What do you get out of it? Like, for real. Like, what are you actually getting out of it? Right? Like, maybe you can get a higher number in an account somewhere, but we all know that higher number is meaningless. We all know that they're just going to jack prices on us to make that irrelevant. So whatever gains you actually make are just pointless. Like, the money if you're one of these people that's like sitting on a lump sum of money, start spending it. Just start enjoying your life. Like, there's no escape strategy for us, right? We all die in the end of all of this, right? So just enjoy the life that you have. Enjoy whatever time you've got, right? Enjoy what's going on around you, and stop listening to these frauds, because they're obviously frauds, right? Like, we don't need to discuss it any other way. The people who are walking around trying to justify this fraudulent system are obviously liars and frauds. And it's gotten really obvious, really, really fast. This level of inequality is unprecedented in American history. Young people are particularly aware of this inequality, being victimized by it, after all, and they are looking for a system that will address it. The appeal of socialism. Socialism offers a number of attractive features to young people. It promises a more equitable distribution of wealth, a more sustainable economy, and a more peaceful world. It also promises to give young people more control over their lives and their future. Yeah, and every time it's been done, that's exactly what happens. I think that's a big thing that people misunderstand or have duped themselves into believing otherwise. That when we do socialism and when we do communism, it works. That's the reason why we do it. And that's the reason why we support it. We're not supporting it because we're like, I live in a world of idealism where wishes and fairy farts are real. No, We support communism and we support socialism because it works. Because every single time it's been done, it's succeeded. That it's only the fraudulent, lying capitalists who lie to you fraudulently constantly that say that it doesn't. But the second you actually look at what's gone on and the second you look at what's actually happened, you realize that it works. It obviously works. Like, obviously. In such an obvious way that to deny it requires a level of delusion. But, I mean, we live in a society where people are like angels are real. So, of course, you can be... If you can believe that level of delusion, you can believe anything you like, right? You can believe anything you like. Yeah, communism failed because it lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and were the first people into space and defeated the largest capitalist army and created the most powerful economies in the world. Failure. Total failure. The different types of socialism. There are many different types of socialism, and not all of them are the same. Some forms of socialism are more authoritarian, while others are more democratic. Some forms of socialism focus on nationalizing the means of production, while others focus on providing social welfare programs. The future of socialism. It is too early to say whether socialism will become the dominant economic system in the future. However, it is clear that it has a growing appeal among young people. If the current trends continue, socialism could become a major force in the years to come. This is such a baller picture. Look at this. This is a statue of Marx. That's really cool. The growing interest in socialism among young people is a sign of the times. It is a reflection of the deep dissatisfaction with capitalism that is felt by many young people. If capitalism does not address the concerns of young people, it is likely that socialism will continue to grow in popularity. Capitalism can't address the issues of young people. If capitalism actually addressed the issues, it would cease to be capitalism. That's the inherent problem. That's the inherent problem, right? Is if it actually addressed the issues it created, it would cease to be capitalism. It would become something else. It would become socialism. Or it would become feudalism again, which is actually the most likely thing to happen. The idea that capitalism just needs to address these issues, it's not going to happen, right? It's a system of extraction and abandonment. And what are they doing? They're extracting and abandoning. That's what they're doing. And if they, the only time any capitalist system anywhere at any moment has ever responded to the needs of the people is when the people were surrounding the halls of power for weeks on end, with signs that had the communist hammer and sickle and calling for revolution, right? That's the only time the system has ever responded to the demands of the people, and of course, the minute that stops. What happens? The capitalists immediately begin to scheme how to regress back to the mean, back to extracting the maximum amount of value from their victims, because that's how the system actually works. And so capitalism can't respond to the needs of the people. And the mistake that people made under FDR, the mistake that the unionists and communists and socialists made when they had the halls of power surrounded and were forcing FDR to put through the New Deal, the mistake that they made is that they allowed the psychopath class to maintain the means of production. They did not insist that the means of production be handed over to the proletariat. That was the mistake that they made, that they took the concessions that the New Deal gave them and they walked away. And while it was a win for a period of time, all of that's been dismantled now, right? And it was systematically dismantled by the psychopath class. And so when things get bad enough that we have to surround the halls of power again, we should not, under any circumstances, accept their concessions. The means of production are nothing. That's where we are now. In addition to the reasons mentioned above, there are a few other factors that may be contributing to the growing interest in socialism among young people. One is the rise of social media, which has made it easier for young people to connect with each other and share ideas about socialism. Another is the increasing popularity of progressive politicians, such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who have been outspoken about their support for socialist policies. I mean, this is how wild it's gotten. That in the United States, centrists like Sanders and Cortez are seen as progressive. Like these people are literally calling for policies to be enacted that were enacted across the capitalist world 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? And that's considered progressive. Like, that's how regressed our society has become. According to various polls and studies, young people in the United States and other countries prefer socialism over capitalism. Here are some of the percentages of young people who prefer socialism. A 2018 Gallup poll found that 51% of young Americans have a positive view of socialism, while less than half view capitalism positively. So 45% of the society is dim-witted. Gallup reports that older Americans have been consistently more positive about capitalism than socialism, right? Because they've gone demented, that they're denying the existence of climate change and they're doing everything they can to destroy the planet. A 2019 Gallup poll found that since 2010, young adults' positive ratings of socialism have hovered near 50%, while the rate has been consistently near 34% for Gen Xers and near 30% for baby boomers and traditionalists. At the same time, young adults' overall opinion of capitalism has deteriorated to the point that capitalism and socialism are tied in popularity amongst this age group. A 2021 Axis Momentum poll found that 51% of young Americans have a positive view of socialism, while only 42% have a positive view of capitalism. A 2021 study by the Institute of Economic Affairs found that a majority of millennials and Gen Z in Britain want to live under socialism and believe it would be the best system to tackle UK inequality. And a 2021 Guardian article reports that nearly 8 out of 10 young Britons blame capitalism for the housing crisis, and 2/3 want to live under a socialist economic system. So even in Britain, which is a society that is literally collapsing because of the decisions that the capitalists have made, you still have 1/3 of the people living in Britain are either psychopaths or totally thick, right? Or just like demented, like, yeah, this is great. It's great that that poverty is spreading and the despair is spreading, right? It's wonderful. Yeah, so even though 2/3 of them are saying, yeah, reality exists and we should move forward into reality, 1/3 of them are still living in this dream world where no, you just need to get a better job, work harder. Overall, the search results suggest that a significant percentage of young people prefer socialism over capitalism, with percentages ranging from 45% to 67%. The reasons for this preference vary, but concerns about inequality, a desire for economic and social change, and a negative view of capitalism are common themes. And then here's a bunch of citations. Like, it is my hope that this will persist, that the more that will enter like a kind of a Columbo sort of situation, where the more the capitalist death cult attempts to convince us that, hey, capitalism is cool and groovy, the more we will actually begin to see through them. The more we'll begin to understand that, like, oh no, you guys are genuinely psychotic. You guys are genuinely psychotic. That, like, you guys know me, right? It's a big reason why you tune in, right? Like, I have already reached the conclusion that what is happening is not an oopsie-doo. It's not, well, we tried to make a good system that worked for everyone, and for some reason, you know, real head scratcher, it just didn't work out, right? I am of the opinion that the capitalists are well aware of what it is that they're doing. They're well aware. They know and they understand that they're betraying everybody. They know and they understand that they are causing suffering. They know and they understand fully, and they consider that to be a feature. They consider that to be a positive, right? That they get off on that. That they look at the suffering that they spread and they giggle like children. And they think, oh boy, I'm going to have a real good orgasm tonight, thinking about the suffering that I'm spreading throughout the world. Right? That's my position on the psychopath class, which is why I call them the psychopath class. And more people are going to begin to put this together. More and more people are going to begin to realize and piece together that, like, oh, it's not that they're just self-interested. It's not that they're just like, oh, you know, I've got a little bit more wealth and you don't have so much wealth, so we're just going to maintain this system as it is. It's a purposeful attempt to do harm to you on purpose. That people like Joe Biden, people like Donald Trump, people like Alexandria Cortez, right? People like Matt Gaetz, people like Lauren Boebert get off on causing you pain. Like, and until we actually recognize this, we're still going to keep believing that, like, oh, we just got to vote harder. We can move the needle by voting harder. Nope. You're just always going to end up with psychos, right? Because that's what the system generates. That's what the system rewards. Those are the people who get into power. That's how the system actually functions, and that's how it actually works. And if you did actually manage to get people into the halls of power who were not like this, they would be expelled, and historically do get expelled. We got plenty of examples of people getting expelled for thinking this way, right? Dennis Kucinich, literally, they redrew the districts in order to eliminate his seat. Like, that's what they did to Kucinich. Ralph Nader, right? Ralph Nader, they literally locked him out of the Democratic Convention Hall. They wouldn't let him enter the Democratic Convention halls. Like, they threw him out unceremoniously. They locked him out physically. Like, the idea that we're going to just vote our way out of this is a total farce. A total farce and a total joke. Demand Better, good to see you, Ben. Absolute pleasure. Yeah, Ben, I've got that article right here, my man. Like, this is how you know we're ruled by total clueless dimwits. Like, they're psychos, but they're also clueless. Like, walking around calling Justin Trudeau Marxists, what an insult. What an insult to the people you're talking to, right? Because you have to assume that they're dimwits, right? It's an insult to Marxists, because how dare you insult Marxism by saying that Justin Trudeau is in any way a Marxist, right? It's an insult to your own intelligence, right? Which Pierre Poilievre doesn't care about his own intelligence. Poilievre has figured it out, right? He's figured it out. Tell people what they want to hear. That's how Canadian politics actually works. 1 second, guys. Okay, Milo. My little guy is a peanut butter fiend. And we're down to the peanut butter jar, we're down to the dregs, and so when we get down to the dregs, he gets to lick the peanut butter jar, right? Isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting, Milo? It's exciting that you get the whole peanut butter jar all to yourself. What a little character, what a little cartoon character this guy is. I'd show you him, but I think all you'd see is his butt right now. Yeah, if discomfort is motivating, why do we give soldiers free room and board, right? It's interesting, right? Like we only give people free room and board if they're willing to murder people, right? If you're willing to murder people on behalf of the state, you get free room and board, and if you're willing to murder people just generally in the civilian population, then you go to prison where you get free room and board. I'd say we're a weird people. We make interesting and strange decisions. Grinning Guys writes, I love arguing with capitalists and telling them all about the social contracts present within capitalism. Then I tell them that capitalism is a form of socialism. And their mind explodes. I mean, capitalism is only a form of socialism if you're extremely rich, right? Then you get all the bailouts, right? Like, if our tax money goes to Bill Gates when he needs to be bailed out, or Chase Manhattan Bank or something, everybody goes, that makes sense, they earned it. But if you take that same amount of money and give it to people so they don't live in poverty or they don't live in the streets, that's a handout and you're disincentivizing production. Like, we're just an extremely dim-witted people. Like, here, I love the Beaverton because it always points out how dim-witted we are. Country with massive housing shortage, not sure what to do with all these empty office buildings. Right? Like, we could solve this problem. And I think that we could solve this problem pretty quickly. Right? As employees continue to express their desire to work from home, owners of downtown office buildings aren't sure what they'll do with all this unused space. Also, in unrelated news, Canada has a huge shortfall in terms of housing supply that is on the verge of causing a financial crisis. Unless employers require their staff to commute for long hours each day in order to do the same job they could do from the comfort of their own home, we're in big financial trouble, says Cadillac Fairview spokesperson Keith Perez from his home office. I mean, what else are we going to do with these large buildings located right next to transit that already have electrical, plumbing, and elevators installed? Forcing people to work here and live somewhere else seems like the only solution to me. The debate over working from home has been raging ever since COVID started, with employees overwhelmingly preferring it and employers concerned about a drop in productivity and the loss of office culture, which we assume refers to wearing jeans on Friday and the occasional birthday sheet cake. Meanwhile, a lack of affordable housing in basically every municipality has been a pressing issue for decades and has been recognized as a crisis by parties across the political spectrum. Maybe we can modify our office buildings to something else, like a restaurant or 34 floors of laser tag. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, added Perez as he walked by numerous homeless people. When asked whether the empty office buildings could be converted into housing, however, Perez scoffed. You think we can just flip a switch and make that big change? It would be really hard and very expensive. When asked if it would be harder and or more expensive than securing land and building brand new housing from the ground up, Perez wandered away without responding. In Ontario, the Ford government has already come out in favor of converting unused office space into housing, but is requiring that the office buildings be transported to the Greenbelt first. Oh yeah, Ben Jorgensen, you're a couple of episodes behind the Canadian commie, my man. I think you must have seen the recent study from the UBC about redistributing wealth to homeless people. Spoiler, they don't actually spend it on drugs. Yeah, big shock, right? Big surprise, right? If you give money to people, they spend it on the things that they need, right? My favorite thing that I've seen about that particular article is that if you go to any comment section, even though the article researchers explicitly say that most people who are homeless are not in fact mentally ill, the entire conversation is about how people who are homeless are mentally ill. Like it's the only way that some of these frauds can actually connect these dots in the back of their head in order to protect the system of capital, right? It has to be an individualism crisis. It has to be. It must be the case that this is a crisis of the individual. And of course, this is what these frauds are willing to do now, right? It's like with the housing crisis. The fraudulent capitalists are willing to confess that they are clueless morons, right? That capitalism is incapable of planning for basic infrastructure, that we have an increasing population and we while also not creating housing, and that capitalism stalled on creating housing, and that has created this crisis. And this is what the capitalists are actually willing to admit. They're willing to say out loud in front of you that capitalism is an incompetent system that can't actually plan for the future and refuses to plan for the future, right? So, and why do they confess to this incompetence? Because if they actually confessed to other aspects of why the housing crisis is happening, you would recognize very quickly that they are psychopaths, that they are actively withholding housing and they are actively keeping housing away from the housing market on purpose because they are using it as speculative investments, right? And they are way more willing to confess their incompetence than their psychopathic nature. And this is where it's come. So when capitalist simps say things like, well, most people who are homeless have mental illness, what they're really admitting is that the system of capital is more than willing to abandon people who have mental illnesses, right? That if you have a mental illness and you can't fit in with society, capitalism will happily abandon you, and that's justifiable. It makes sense that we would abandon people who have mental illnesses because they're not productive, right? They don't increase the productive capacity, so we should abandon our most vulnerable citizens that we have a responsibility to take care of. And this is what the capitalists confess to you every single day in front of your face, right? As soon as you stop taking what these people say at face value and you actually think skeptically about the things they say for 30 seconds, you realize that they are like self-reporting and confessing the most dark, bleak shit possible, constantly, all the time, right in front of you, as if it's completely normal. It's completely normal that there are all these homeless people because the system of capital abandons the mentally ill. Oh, Jesus. That's dark. Like, that's dark. And then instead of taking any amount of resources and actually funding mental health services and getting these people off the streets and into houses, what we should do is increase police funding because mentally ill people are a danger to society. Bleak and dark and psychopathic. Like, and it's not an insignificant amount of people who think this way. It's not an insignificant amount of people who think this way. Right? Like, Big yikes. And of course, this issue is not going to be resolved. Citing the easing of excess demand, Bank of Canada reveals its latest decision on the key interest rate. The Bank of Canada held its key interest rate steady at 5% on Wednesday, deciding against another rate hike as the economy begins to falter. With recent evidence that excess demand in the economy is easing, right? So people can't buy stuff. Excess demand in the economy is easing. I love this Orwellian bullshit language that they use, where they refuse to actually say things straightforwardly because they need to talk in this code to sort of make it seem like they're not psychopaths. Because we've collapsed the economy and our incompetence is so desperate that nobody can actually buy anything, the excess demand in the economy is easing. And given the lagging effects of monetary policy, right, because it takes a minute for our shitty policies to destroy the populace, Governing Council decided to hold the policy interest rate at 5%. So we've twisted the screws as tight as they can go, and we don't need to twist them anymore. Statistics Canada reported last week real gross domestic product contained in the second quarter, which convinced forecasters that another rate hike would be unlikely. I love that they say things like real gross domestic product because they know that most of our economy is fake, right? It's mainly just shuffling numbers around, right? The Canadian economy has entered a period of weaker growth, which is needed to relieve price pressures, right? So because nobody has any goddamn money, because we've absolutely destroyed our economy and destroyed our future as a people, so that we can have billionaires. What we need to do is weaken growth, right? So make our economy as shitty as possible, and that will relieve price pressures. Because no one will have any money, corporations won't be able to jack prices on us anymore. This is their thinking. Right? That will make things as shitty as possible for the mass of people. And once things are as shitty as possible for the mass of people, corporations will stop jacking prices because they won't be able to gouge people for any extra money. This is like what they're confessing to you in front of your face when you actually decipher their shitty language. Canada's labor market has also lost some of its steam. No shit. The unemployment rate has been on the rise for 3 consecutive months. Wednesday's announcement comes after the Bank of Canada raised interest rates at its last 2 decision meetings, bringing a previous pause on rate hikes to an end. This is what happens when your decision-making basically boils down to how do we make a billionaire richer, right? If your entire economy is geared around the idea that billionaires need more money, well, then you're willing to sacrifice everything to do it, and they are, right? And they are. Altogether, the central bank has raised its key interest rate 10 times since March 2022, bringing it from near zero to the highest level since 2001. These rate hikes are expected to continue taking effect on the economy, slowing consumer demand and dampening business investment. Right? Like, literally chasing smaller players out of the market is what they're doing, so that big corporations can buy up assets for cheap. Economists estimate it takes about 1 to 2 years for a rate hike to fully affect demand and business activity. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem, there's a shitty 80s movie villain name right there. Tiff Macklem. Tiff Macklem, here's a guy who at the end of a movie, if he fell into a big pile of shit, you would cheer, is set to hold a news conference on Thursday after delivering a speech to the Calgary Chamber of Congress. Thinman Freeland calls BOC's interest rate pause welcome relief. I fully respect the independence of the Bank of Canada as it delivers on its mandate to return inflation to target. Says her number one priority is using tools to ensure interest rates come down as soon as possible. Right. So after the corporations have chased out all of these small players and they've bought up assets for cheap, then they can give free money to the billionaire class again. Right? Like, it's a grift. It's very obviously a grift. You've got to be stupid to think it's not a grift at this point. And we're all just going along with it, right? We all just keep going to work. We all just keep working for these people who are standing in front of you, saying out loud in front of your face that our policy goal is to make your life worse. That's our policy goal, is to purposefully make things harder for you, on purpose, Because what could we do about the price, right? If we were actually interested in helping people, what could we actually do? Oh, we could arrest Galen Weston Jr. and put him in jail and take all his assets away from him. There you go. We could nationalize the food distribution chain. There you go. There's something serious that we could actually do. We could actually say, hey, if you price gouge the way that you're obviously price gouging, that you brag about, right? We see your reports. We see you bragging about your the highest corporate profits we've ever experienced, right? Oh, we could just put you in jail for that. That's profiteering, right? Price fixing, right? We could definitely put you in jail for that. So how about instead of that, you drop prices? And if you don't, then we'll put you in jail and take your assets. Oh, it's authoritarian and communism doesn't work and Vuvela iPhone. Right? Right? Meanwhile, in the most unshocking news to anyone with a brain in their head, big real estate executives among top donors to Pierre Poilievre's conservatives. Big fucking shocker, right? I know for me personally, when I found out this news, I was absolutely floored by it. I was absolutely shocked to find out that the Conservative Party's donor list includes names of real estate investors and developers that are buying up affordable housing across Canada. Executives at big real estate companies profiting off and even drying up high real estate prices across Canada are listed as donors to the federal Conservative Party, Elections Canada records show. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has been railing against high real estate prices and presenting himself as the solution to Canada's housing affordability crisis. Yet Poilievre's party also appears to have received financial support from top executives at some of Canada's biggest real estate investment trusts. Housing experts and advocacy groups have blamed real estate investment trusts, or REITs, for the financialization of housing and skyrocketing rents across Canada. Property wealth is a massive source of inequality in British Columbia and across the country. The name of Richard Abode, the CEO of an REIT called Forum Asset Management, is listed as donating $7,875 to the federal Conservative Party since 2017, according to Election Canada records. A former asset management property was recently criticized for a Vancouver viral video that showed a housing unit in a former single-room occupancy hotel in the downtown east side that historically housed people at around shelter rates was now a micro suite available for $2,000 a month. According to CBC News, Toronto-based company Foreign Asset Management purchased the building less than 2 years ago and has offered tenants in unrenovated units $15,000 to leave. Poilievre even tweeted about the viral video, blaming the situation on 8 years of Trudeau and the NDP, despite the name of the company's CEO being listed as a top Conservative donor. According to the Forum Asset Management's 2022 impact report, the enterprise value of their assets under management currently exceeds $1.7 billion. Abode did not return Press Progress requests for comment. Big shocker there. Dr. Penny Gerstein, Professor Emeritus, School of Community and Regional Planning and co-director of the Housing Research Collaborative, says REITs are increasingly responsible for rising rents across the country. There's a pattern now of REITs sort of buying up across Canada, Gerstein told Press Progress. It is something that we really need to be aware of. Before, the most expensive rental housing were the ones where people were buying individual condos and then renting them out and using the rent to pay off the mortgage. But now we have this phenomenon. In BC, according to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives BC, a consequence of the housing crisis and shortage in BC includes an explosion of residential real estate wealth, now totaling over $2.1 trillion in the province. The names of other top REIT executives are listed as recent donors to the Conservative Party, according to Election Canada's records. The name of Jason Jogia, Chief Investment Officer for Avenue Living Real Estate Core Trust, who previously said that the company's business strategy is to focus on provinces without rent control, is listed as having donated $1,900 to the Conservative Party in 2022. In the same year, Avenue's assets under management grew by 48% to $4.6 billion. The name of Haven Development CEO Paolo Abate is also listed as making $6,600 in donations to the Conservatives from 2020 to 2022, while the name of Canadian Apartments Properties Chief Investment Officer Julian Schoenfeld appears to have donated $7,060 between 2012 and 2020. Before anybody thinks, like, these numbers seem kind of low, it's because here in Canada we don't have this system of infinite. We don't allow people to donate infinitely the way that you do in the United States. We still have corruption, but we don't have the overt. We haven't like legalized corruption like in the United States. And really, when you think about it, this is just a down payment, right? This $7,000, right? While it seems like a low number, it's just a down payment. That's all it is. It's just a way for these corporations to say, hey, I'm willing to give you as much as I can legally. Imagine what I'll give you when you're out of office. And like, this is the most unsurprising thing that exists, but people are still going to vote for Pierre, thinking, yeah, this will get that housing market. This will get the housing market all fixed up. You watch. You watch. Yeah. DJ writes, no wonder suicide rates are rising with how mentally ill people are treated in this society. Yeah, and Ben says, a lot of them are mentally ill, so what? That doesn't mean they deserve to live on the streets. Yeah, the most powerful piece of media that has been made in this regard is easily the film Joker, right? Like, what happens when a society abandons a person onto the streets? What do you get? Right? You get what you deserve. I think the most wild thing about that movie is that people refuse to acknowledge that it's about mental illness. I think that's the most wild thing about that film. As if, good to see you, my man. As if writes, you absolutely can win via the vote if people vote for you, but they won't. Canadians are too brainwashed. They can't even be bothered to vote for the barely left federal NDP. I mean, the NDP have a different problem right now, right? And that problem, and I've said it again, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, and it's a shame. I don't like this. I'm not saying, haha, I'm not cheering this, but it is absolutely the truth. Canadians are not going to vote for a man in a turban. That's the bottom line. That if the NDP wanted to pick somebody who was completely unelectable, they couldn't have picked a better person. That it doesn't matter what Jagmeet Singh says. It doesn't matter what policies he supports. It doesn't matter what he puts forward. It simply doesn't matter. If he was a white guy from Brampton with the name Jason Singer, he would be the front runner right now, right? But he's not. Right? He's a brown guy with a big giant beard. Looks like Osama bin Laden wearing a turban. Canadians are not going to vote for him. And that is sadly true. That's the sad truth. Right? Canadians are not ready for it. They are not prepared to vote for Jagmeet Singh. They're not prepared to vote for a man in a turban. Doesn't matter what he says, and it doesn't matter what he represents. Like, it doesn't matter. And the fact that the NDP, but I mean, like, the NDP are either like blisteringly dumb, like just dumb on a level that we have never ever seen before in politics, like, and I don't mean like Western politics, I mean politics, like literally go back to day one of humanity to this moment right now where we are. And the NDP are either the dumbest political party that has ever existed, or they understand that they are controlled dissent, which, in my view, that is what they are, right? That they understand that they exist to be a graveyard of the left. They exist to take people like myself, right? People who understand that something more serious needs to happen. People who understand that the system of capital has abandoned us. People who understand that we need to form up and actually organize outside of the system of capital, and to funnel us into a dead end, right? That's essentially how the Democratic Party works in the United States. and it's how the NDP work here in Canada. And if they wanted to destroy any possibility of any serious left organization, they couldn't have picked a better candidate. He's absolutely perfect for that, right? And he especially is useful for rounding up a lot of minority support, a lot of support for groups like the Sikhs, a lot of support for people who are like this, right? But I mean, it's getting so obvious now that if like, that's why I say, like, if it's not intentional, then these people are dumb. Like, so dumb that we should not be entrusting them with the powers of the nation. Like, that's a really dumb decision. Like it's amazing how communists are the ones for being blamed. Oh, you guys are utopian. Well, what's more utopian than walking up to a group of like white Canadians with a history of white supremacy, a history of slavery, a history of First Nations genocide, and saying to them, your leader will be a guy wearing a turban. Like, what's more pie in the sky than that? Is there anything more utopian? I can't think of a single thing that's more utopian than that. If you're genuinely sitting there thinking to yourself, well, that shouldn't matter and people should vote along policy lines. Oh, okay, bud. Like, I can't think of a more utopian position than that. Ben writes, I don't think it has much to do with Jagmeet wearing a turban. The NDP can never form government on the federal level. The system is set up so they can never win. I tend to disagree with you, my man. Like, I think the NDP can and have historically been a threat to liberal and conservative power, right? Like, even someone like Jack Layton was getting concessions from the liberals and the conservatives and garnering more success and garnering more power. So much, like, if it came out that the CIA got Jack Layton with the cancer gun, I would be like, yeah, makes sense. I would not sit there and be like, what? I'd just basically be like, yeah, here's the document. It came out. The CIA got Jack Layton with the cancer gun, right? Yep. No, I mean, the conservatives are not... Ben writes, people like to laud Jack Layton for his performance in 2001, but a lot of his success was really just the Liberals' failure. He didn't take any of the CPC vote. Yeah, because, I mean, that makes sense. Like, the left will never get the vote from the psychopath class. Like, that, like the CPC still doesn't acknowledge the existence of climate change, right? Like, I think technically the CPC does, but 50% of conservatives don't. And so, like... We're dealing with like a total lunatic party that's just definitely lost its mind. It's never going to vote. Like the conservatives are never going. This is what's so wild about people swinging over to the conservatives is that like they're so obviously lunatics. Like they don't acknowledge reality. They don't acknowledge the seriousness of what's going on. It genuinely is that I've described this situation so many times. It genuinely is that the situation where we have an army pounding on the door of the castle, like straight up, like the orcs smashing in the door of Helm's Deep kind of stuff, and literally we are being sieged by just the demonic army of evil orcs, and we run to the crown, and we run up to the king, and we go, oh my God, we need aid and we need help. There's an army of orcs smashing in our doors, and we are literally supporting the guy that says, orcs? There's no orcs. No, there's no orcs. You're just crazy, right? That's straight up what's happening right now, and it's absolutely insane what we're doing. And it's absolutely insane that we're actually going to throw all of our weight behind a party that is demented, that is just absolutely raving at the mouth, lunatic level demented. And I'm not even talking about like the obvious shit that's going to happen in the housing market when the conservatives take power. Like if you actually think that your rent is going to go down, if you actually think that housing is going to somehow equalize or something's going to happen when the conservatives get in, then you're a lunatic. You're just out of your fucking mind. But it's the communists that are the utopian ones, right? Like it's the communists that are the utopian ones. Yeah, I think there's a group of people who are willing to vote conservative or liberal arbitrarily based on what is fashionable at the moment. I think that mainly people are voting emotionally. I think mainly people vote based on fuck Trudeau, like that energy, right? Just basically fuck this guy is essentially where people vote, and I don't think that they are swinging towards the conservatives because they're actually sitting there going like, oh, the conservative policy compared to the liberal policy seems to make a lot more sense. I think that they're literally just defaulting to the person who can get rid of this guy. And that really is the long and short of it. I don't think people are thinking rationally. I don't think people are thinking clearly. I think people are acting very emotionally, are being swept up by emotion. And moreover, I think that people are surrounding themselves with media that intentionally whips them up into that hysteria, that actually puts them in that state of being. And I think that they have found a way to kind of make that part of their personality, right? Like when you're walking down the street and you walk by one of these big Ford GMC Thunder Cougar, Falcon Bird, giant World War II sized trucks, and it's plastered with fuck Trudeau and all of this, right? Like that's somebody that has made that his personality. Like that's a person that's made that being this is who they are, that they have bought in to the salesmanship of capital, that this is what it means to be a person and a Canadian in the world. And if you're doing that, then you're just not thinking rationally, right? If you're thinking at all, that you're just responding to in-group thinking, right? And you're basically looking around saying, and I think what most of these people are doing is looking around, seeing that things are getting worse, seeing that things are getting worse for them personally, seeing that things are getting worse for their friends and their family, seeing that things are getting worse historically, right? And they're just going, fuck Trudeau, man. Fuck Trudeau. We got to get that guy out of here. How do we get that guy out of here? Fuck, let's just fucking vote conservative and get that fucking guy out of here. Fuck Trudeau. And that's it. Like, that's it. And it's the reason why when you talk to these guys and you point out stuff like this, right, they just cannot deal with it. They just will not process it. It doesn't penetrate, and it cannot penetrate because they are living in a state of hysteria. They are living in a state like every single person at some point in their life has lost their temper, right? We all have a moment in our lives, at least one moment in our lives where we lose our temper, right? Well, when you lose your temper, right, is it easy to reason with people who have lost their temper? Is it easy to reason with somebody when they're running on that kind of energy? No. Most people who have lost their temper start to get into a position of action, right? That they want to do stuff, and they want something done, and they want to see it done, and they don't care, and they're not going to listen to anything else. Well, I think we're dealing with a society that has lost its temper, right? That things are so obviously out of whack and so obviously out of control, and instead of facing their ire, instead of the ire of the zeitgeist of the populace being faced at where it belongs, which is the system of capital, right? Fuck Trudeau. That's all it is. That's all it is. And it's not a group of people thinking reasonably. Because if they were thinking reasonably, nobody would support the Conservatives if they were thinking clearly and rationally and reasonably. Nobody would look at the Conservatives and think, yeah, these are the guys. In this moment of enormous climate change crisis, in this moment of wealth inequality, in this moment where systems of capital are actively working to destroy the society from the ground up, in this moment, the people who we should definitely be voting for are the climate change denying privatization hogs, right? Definitely. That's the wise decision for sure. No, it's so obviously the wrong decision. It's so clearly the wrong decision. But people are not thinking reasonably. And if you actually stand up and say even the most reasonable thing about Trudeau, you will witness the full force of a person who is living a life of permanent hysteria, right? That you're not actually like you're not actually dealing with somebody who is got their feet on the ground. They don't have control of their own emotions. And it's really clear when you talk to these people. Like, it's really clear. Like, you're gonna get somebody who is living in this height, and immediately you're gonna get a tirade against Trudeau. You're gonna get some, and they'll just dive right into this anti-communist bullshit, right? Because it's all tied together. It's all tied together. Yeah. Mr. Moon, good to see you. Funny how the Conservatives don't want to conserve anything. Yeah, the world needs to burn harder. Yeah, and that's their position. Like, this is the thing that's wild, man, is that it's not like they're lying. Like, I mean, Pierre Poilievre is a pretty effective liar, but the Conservatives themselves have been pretty clear. Like, their ideology is pretty straightforward, right? We need to burn everything as fast as possible, make sure that we spread as much suffering as possible, privatize everything as fast as possible, for what they call the economy, right? And when you ask them, well, what's the economy? You find out pretty fast that it's just a religious belief, right? They just have this religious belief in a god they call the economy. And what we need to do is sacrifice everything at the altar of this economy, and that will somehow be beneficial for the society. And when you start asking, well, what are the benefits? It literally is just like drive big truck. Like, we've created this sort of fictional, like, I've said it a couple of times this stream, but I guess it's just banging around in the back of my head. Like, it's really, really wild how it's communists that get called utopian when nobody's more utopian than capitalists. Like, nobody's more utopian than conservatives. And it's not even remotely close. That the conservative ideology is, if we destroy everything, the world will be good. Like, that's the conservative position. And like, openly stated. That, like, we need to have, everybody needs to be armed so that if you come and take my stuff, I can shoot you. Yeah, history ended, didn't you hear? Exactly. But, like, the conservative position is stuff like, yeah, if I need a gun so that when my neighbor tries to steal my stuff, I can shoot them. And they should have a gun so that when I try to come and steal their stuff, they can shoot me. So everybody's just pointing weapons at each other all of the time, constantly, in the conservative ethos. There's no such thing as cooperation or collaboration. Your neighbor is a competitor, right? Pierre Poilievre would be a better prime minister than Trudeau. So? Doesn't mean anything. Trudeau's been a wide failure across the board. The idea that Trudeau is being called a Marxist is a joke, right? It shows you how clueless these guys actually are. But this is like saying dying by having your head crushed in would be better than dying by being run through by a sword, right? It's true. You die either way. And Pierre Poilievre will be a better prime minister than Trudeau, right? Because at least the Conservatives will achieve their goals. At least the Conservatives will actually get something done, right? It might not be beneficial to the populace, but it'll be something that gets done. They'll, like, follow through on their initiatives, right? Like, this is the weird truth of politics in Canada, is that the Liberals are basically failures across the board 100% of the time. They operate on behalf of the capitalist death cult. They achieve nothing, they do nothing, and they're total losers most of the time. The only time that Liberals actually accomplish anything is when they get flanked by the left and they have to respond, right? It's the only time that anything actually happens in Canada. And then when the Conservatives get in, they think to themselves, well, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do that'll make us rich. And there is, like, one thing that we could do that might actually benefit the populace to a certain degree, and so we'll do that. So you take a look at somebody like Stephen Harper, right? Stephen Harper's a great example of this. Stephen Harper enacted a lot of policies that essentially took as much money as possible from the populace and gave it to billionaires, essentially. And Harper was well rewarded for his fealty, right? But Harper also enacted the child benefit the child benefit policy, right? Like literally a basic income for children. That's what it is, and he's the guy who is responsible for putting that in. So there's a major, massive social accomplishment that wasn't put in by the NDP or the Liberals. It was put in by the Conservatives, right? That a Conservative Prime Minister thought to himself, hey, you know how we could resolve a lot of child poverty in this country? You know what we could do? We could put in a basic income for children. That if you have a child, you just get money. Straight up. Well, what policy can you point to that Trudeau has done on that scale? Is there anything that you can point to that Trudeau has done that is its equivalent? The closest that you can get to is the CERB, but Trudeau did everything he could to destroy that, right? That for one fleeting moment, it looked like Trudeau was actually going to enact a policy that could actually fundamentally change the relationship between labor and capital in a serious and significant way. But the moment Trudeau actually understood what he had done, because I think he just did it in a panic and a tizzy, because he's essentially a walking haircut, he did everything he could to destroy it as efficiently and effectively as possible. And now they're going after people. That if you received like a penny more than they think that you should have, then they're going to spend $1 million to fucking go after you. Meanwhile, for giving a bunch of PPP loans for billionaires, right? So yeah, Poilievre is going to be a better prime minister than Trudeau because Trudeau did fucking nothing. And historically, what Conservatives do, while they betray the populace just like the Liberals do, is they also tend to enact policies that do help. Like, we get a policy in the back that actually does do something, right? The child care benefit was a serious policy that actually did help. And it's undeniable and you can't take it away, right? What's Trudeau done? Fuck all. So yeah, Pierre Poilievre will be better. I would prefer to have my head crushed than be run through if I'm going to die, right? It's not hard to be better than liberals. Like, it really isn't. Like, liberals are universal failures. They achieve nothing. They do nothing. They're basically conservatives with a tilted head going, "Bah." Like, there's a reason why I'm a communist and I'm not a liberal, right? Because if the liberals actually accomplished anything and actually did anything of value, then I would probably be a liberal. But they don't, and they never have. The way I see it is cons are the wolves and the libs are the sly, cunning foxes. I mean, I don't think we should be insulting wolves and foxes like this, right? Like, wolves and foxes are wolves and foxes, and they are good, honest, hard-working species that are doing their best in a hard and cruel world, right? The way that I would prefer to actually describe these people are as frauds. That they're all frauds. They're clearly frauds. That Pierre Poilievre is like really showing, I have a thesis about how to get elected in Canada, and it's just lie. Just lie, right? What you want to do is you want to ally yourself with the capitalist class. You want to make sure that they understand that you are their surrogate and you are there to pay fealty to capital, right? And make sure that they understand that everything that comes out of your mouth on this campaign trail is actually a complete and total lie, that you're not actually interested in doing any of the stuff that you have to say. Engender as much trust with your owners as possible. And then when you go around, just lie your face off, right? Just lie your face off. It's the reason why O'Toole couldn't secure the victory. It's the reason why Andrew Scheer couldn't secure the victory. It's because they insisted on at least spinning the story so that it wasn't an overt lie, right? They insisted on standing in front of the populace and saying, yeah, our intention is to privatize everything and plunge the society into desperation and poverty as fast as possible while enriching our owners, because then all of the wealth will trickle down magically somehow. But taking that and like spinning it in the way that is to make it sound as appealing as possible. And the problem is that most of the society is glommed onto this trickle-down garbage. Most of the society has keyed in to the idea that all of this is trash, and that it's obviously false, and we're obviously not, the wealth is not trickling down. It's obviously the case. If you think so, you're dim-witted, right? Or culpable. But Pierre Poilievre has figured out, I could just lie. There's literally no consequences for lying. I don't have a soul anyway. It doesn't matter. I can just lie my face off as much as I possibly can. And so I'll say, yeah, we're going to make sure that housing goes down, and we're going to make sure that rent comes under control, and we're going to make sure that people are taken care of, and that hardworking Canadians are rewarded for their hard work, and we're going to make sure that the policies of Trudeau are turned over, and that we actually spread prosperity throughout the society so that we can all prosper together. Like, he's full of shit. Like, he's so totally full of shit. And as soon as you pay any attention to his history, you understand it very, very quickly. And so he's just figured out that the way to secure power in Canada is to lie. And he's the most effective liar that the Conservatives have put forward in a long, long time, and he's doing a really good job of it. The lies that he tells are very believable, and they're very good. And he's very effective at telling the lies that he tells. And when he gets into power, they're going to pass a big omnibus bill, right? This is what the Conservatives are going to do when they take power. They're going to put forward a 2,000-page document, right? An omnibus bill that is going to pass a whole bunch of laws all at once, so that nobody can actually go through it effectively and efficiently. There won't be any debate. There won't be any conversation. And everybody will be pissed off about it, right? Everybody will go, I can't believe that the Conservatives did the thing that they always have done 100% of the time. This is against democracy, and we didn't get to debate it, and there isn't any conversation about its contents, and we didn't even have the chance to read it, and oh my God, they're just jamming it through. This isn't the way our system is supposed to work, like has happened every single time over and 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 over again. And the document will be so thick and so dense and so incomprehensible to the average citizen, because it'll basically be a series of amendments, more or less. So to understand that document, you'll have to understand the source document. Canadians don't read and are illiterate, and so they're not going to do any of that. What are they going to do? They're going to rely on the news media, which is owned by the very people who fund the Conservative Party, so they're not going to know anything about this document. And what the document is basically going to do is it's going to say, extract as much wealth out of the society as possible, give it to the billionaire class, and abandon the people. That's what's going to happen. And anybody who thinks anything else is going to happen is a dupe. Just a dupe of the highest order. And what we are watching right now is no different than that episode of The Simpsons, the monorail episode. It's not actually different. Like, the only difference is that the con man comes in, and there's another con man there who's been conning the society, and then that con man uses the con that the original con man was using against him in order to secure power. But the story remains the same, that at the end of the day, the con man runs off with the loot, while the dimwits of the society are singing Monorail. Like, it's what we're watching, and it's happening in real time right in front of our faces. And when the Conservatives get into power, and when they pass their omnibus bill, I'm going to say, I fucking told you so. And I'm going to do the best that I can to find out the contents of that omnibus bill, because there will be people, like Press Progress is probably a good place. Canada Land might do it, right? There are going to be people who are actually going to do that work and sift through it and actually find out what it actually does. Just like when Harper did it, right? But I can almost guarantee you the bottom line is social services privatized, taxes on the wealthy removed, wealth extracted upwards, and society by and large abandoned. And why can I essentially guarantee that? Because I'm not a fucking dimwit. Like, if Jason Voorhees walks into the room holding onto a machete, hockey mask on his face, and somebody said, well, maybe we should negotiate with him, I would think that person is a dimwit. And I'd be like, okay, off you go. I'm going to run. I'm running. That's the only thing that you should do, right? If you see Jason Voorhees in front of you, the only thing you should do is run like a maniac, right? But if you're going to be like, well, maybe he's just misunderstood and we just need to understand his position a little bit better. You know what we should do is we should let Jason Voorhees have control of the prime ministership. Maybe he won't just kill people this time, even though we've made like 10 movies about it. Ben writes, do you think there's any way Trudeau turns it around in the next 2 years and gets reelected again? No. Because, and I think this is really, really important to remember, Ben, as I've been going off on Trudeau and Pierre and all this kind of stuff, they work for the same people. That's really important to understand, is that Trudeau and Poilievre work for the same people, and that Trudeau's usefulness as surrogate to the capitalist class, Trudeau's usefulness to the capitalists has run its course. That Trudeau, the reason why Trudeau was useful to the capitalists is because he was an effective smokescreen. That there was that this rising anger against inequality and climate change and all this stuff has been happening for a long time. And Trudeau was the perfect person to stand in front of the nation and say, we acknowledge the existence of climate change. We acknowledge the existence of wealth inequality. We acknowledge the existence of reality. So that the populace would go, oh, somebody's actually acknowledging the existence of reality. Let's all vote for this guy who has the name of a popular former prime minister. He's doing the thing that we like. Let's vote for him. And then when he got into power, he basically turned around, bowed his head to the capitalist death cult, took their notes, and read them in front of us. And that's been his entire prime ministership. His entire prime ministership has just been, the fossil fuel industry says this. The agricultural industry says this. And he's had no real ideas of his own. Any of the policies and platforms that he has run on that would have any significance, he's completely backed off on. He achieved almost nothing, right? And has essentially just been a floofy haircut, a pretty face for corporate capital. And now that's reaching at the end of it's reaching the end of its tolerance. That the populace has recognized that he's not going to actually do anything. Most of us have realized that for a long time now. It's why the Liberals have been running on minority governments being propped up by the NDP, right, for the longest time, because most of us have actually abandoned ship already. That this swing over to the Conservatives is now because the rage has taken hold, right? Now it's just the rage is taking hold. Instead of it being like, man, what a disappointment Trudeau is, now it's fuck Trudeau, right? That it used to be, man, Trudeau, I was hoping for better. And now it's literally, fuck this guy. So it's changed. It's different now. But from the corporate capitalist perspective, Trudeau did his job, right? Trudeau's been very successful from the corporate capitalist perspective. He was an excellent smokescreen. That the bullshit surrounding the carbon tax, right? The carbon tax was a complete smokescreen that the fossil fuel industry has benefited off dramatically. The fossil fuel industry got more subsidies out of the Liberals than they got out of the Harper Conservatives. So the Liberals have been completely compliant, have bowed their head completely to corporate power. And public sentiment now has turned against Trudeau. And the only way that Trudeau could get it back in his side is by standing up to the very people he's been paying fealty to this entire time, and he's not going to do it, right? And what's going to happen with Trudeau is that he's going to run his and his entire re-election campaign is going to be based on the principle of we got you through COVID, like stay the course. It's going to be stay the course. It's the only thing they have, because they're not going to stand up against landlords. They're not going to stand up against corporate power. They're not going to stand up against David Thompson, right? They're not going to stand up against the Irvings. They're not going to stand up against the billionaire class. They're going to offer literally nothing. Not that we should believe them if they actually did offer anything. And they're basically just going to say, we're trustworthy, right? And everybody's going to go, fuck Trudeau. And they're going to boot him. And then Trudeau and all of his surrogates, all of the liberals, are just going to go work for corporate power. Right? They're just going to turn around and they're just going to go work at six-figure jobs as consultants in these fossil fuel firms and in this kind of stuff. So they're fine. They're going to be heavily rewarded for their compliance and for their fealty to capitalism. And then the new leader will come in, and that's Pierre Poilievre, and he will do the exact same thing. And the cycle begins anew. Right? Because it's not actually about principles or standing up for anything or getting something done on behalf of the populace. It's about working for corporate power. It's about working for the billionaire class and being rewarded for the by the billionaire class, and upholding the game of electoral politics. That it doesn't really matter who gets in there. Right? It doesn't really matter. They're all going to bow their head and they're all going to say yes, sir, to corporate power. And maybe Trudeau does want to stay being the prime minister for one more term or whatever, so that he can be the prime minister. But the truth is that he's going to be well taken care of by the system of capital. He's going to be well rewarded. He was an extremely good prime minister for them because he was a smokescreen. He wasted everybody's time. We wasted a whole decade on Trudeau. Like, instead of actually storming ExxonMobil, instead of actually demanding that we nationalize these things, instead of actually demanding something serious actually be done seriously, instead of actually demanding real change and actually demanding something, we got this floofy-haired idiot for 10 years. It's perfect. If I was a fossil fuel executive, I'd be very, very, very happy with Trudeau's work. I'd be very, very happy with it if I was one of these psychopaths. And so Trudeau is completely disincentivized to try to be reelected. Like, he probably wants to be reelected just as a personal vanity project, right? But he's not going to be like, we've actually got to fight against the fossil fuel industry. He's actually got he's expended. His energy is over. It's done. He's finished, right? He is finished, and capital is shifting to the Conservatives. And Pierre Poilievre will have his time in the sun, right? They'll have their majority government. They'll pass their big monolithic bills. They'll betray the public, right? And then everybody will get mad at them and vote Liberal again. And the cycle begins anew. The cycle of corporate power. And as long as we keep voting for capitalists, we'll get the same result. Like, we're insane. We're an insane people that have lost our mind. That Albert Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Conservative, liberal, conservative, liberal, conservative, liberal, conservative, liberal. What do you expect? Like, what do you expect? Yeah, bread cultist. Good to see you, by the way, man. Vladimir Lenin killed 400 million people. Yeah. Just like... It's steadily getting to the point now. I'm actually steadily building a series of links that are essentially just CIA links. Like I'm actually building up a steady amount of evidence that comes out of the CIA itself to counteract all of these talking points, and it's getting embarrassing. Like people starved under communism. The CIA didn't think so. I've literally got a document that says the CIA didn't think so. Communism is a dictatorship. The CIA didn't think so. I've literally got a document that says the CIA didn't think so. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah, Jason for president. I mean, if we're going to have serial killers as presidents, we might as well just go all the way, is my thinking. Right? We might as well just have somebody in there who just silently stares at the camera with a machete. Somebody will ask them the question President Putin in the Ukraine war said that the West's response to his actions has been widely seen as unacceptable. Do you have any response to that, President Voorhees? Be more honest. Be more honest, right? Just straight up, we're psychos and we're coming for you. Speaking of Ukraine, how's that for a transition? You guys like how I did that? I am nothing if not an entertainer, God damn it. I am nothing if not an entertainer. Blinken announces additional $1 billion in assistance for Ukraine. We are a very stupid people. Yes, we are. We are a very stupid people. Yes, we are. We're so dumb. We're so stupid. We like to give monies to war. But hey, what are we doing that for? Yeah. Hey, what are we doing that for? Have you noticed there's people in the street? Have you noticed that there's people that can't eat? Have you noticed that we can't defeat this goddamn war? What the hell are we doing this for? Boom! Yeah, you're welcome. Applause. Thank you, Mr. Moon. I exclusively did that just so someone would compliment my voice. Thank you. Yeah, Justin Trudeau's legacy equals weed. I think that is it. I think the legalization of marijuana is what the Liberals accomplished. Which, straight up, like, congratulations for making a thing that should have never been made illegal in the first place legal. Like, good for you. Didn't pardon anybody, right? Everybody's who is in jail over weed-involved crimes is still there, right? No more plastic straws? Yeah, I guess so. Although, I gotta tell you, like, I'm ostensibly in favor of this change. I'm fine with there being no plastic straws. It doesn't bother me at all. Like, I'm completely fine with it. People who are like, paper straws, you're dumb. Like, the people who complain about paper straws, I'm just like, there's something wrong with your brain, I think. Like, I mean, you can think it, I think. Like, you can be like, I don't like paper straws. But to, like, vent about it, you know what I mean? Like, if somebody said to me, you know, John, I just think I preferred the plastic straws, you know? And these paper straws, I don't like them. They're not as good. I'd be like, yeah, you know what? That you're probably right. That's fine. But that's not what's happening. People are like, these, you know, fucking Trudeau with his paper straws. And like, it's a sign that people have lost their fucking minds, you know? That's one of the things I really like about talking with people who disagree with me, but we know that we disagree with one another, but we have that kind of respectful sort of position, is that they do talk to me that way. That they do say things like, well, John, you know, I don't think I like these paper straws very much, these plastic straws, because then I do get to say, like, you know, you're right, I think that's correct, I think I prefer the plastic straws other than the plastic straws. And as long as things remain at that kind of a tone and that kind of a level, you can agree with the people on a lot of stuff. Because a lot of stuff that the people say is not wrong. It's just when it gets up into this, like, and then we're going to vote for the prime minister over it. You know? like we're going to vote for the prime minister because of paper straws. You know what I mean? Read the other day that 60% of residents in Vienna live in public housing and that the housing is good. Can I have that, please? Yeah. We should nationalize most of our housing. Housing is a human right. That housing should be considered a human right. It's absolutely wild to me that people will literally, like, fight and die because they're like, freedom of speech, free speech. We need to make sure everybody can say anything they want at any time, and there should be no consequences from anything for anybody, so that when I say the N-word, everybody should be fine with it, right? But if you say, like, hey, people shouldn't be sleeping on the street, well, they gotta earn that, you know. People gotta work hard. You don't want them to be lazy, do you? Like, it's wild. Wild. Yeah, you can see social housing in Vienna on YouTube. Looks like 5-star. Yeah, man. It's something that can be done. Like, this is the thing, is that, like, we're not talking about a utopia here, right? Do you ever see people in F-15s with F. Trudeau stickers when you go back to visit Manitoba? Yeah, of course. It's the prairies, man. What are you talking about? Like, absolutely. Dude, there is a guy right down the street from me. Right down the street from me. I walk by his truck every single day. His truck is as big as a World War II tank. Right? I'm sure that he's in construction because the back of his truck has actually got shit in it. So I'm like, okay, fine, big truck, fine. You're clearly hauling stuff. Right? It's not pristine, it's not clean, it's not shining, right? Like it looks like a work truck. So I'm like, okay, maybe World War II tank might be aggressive, fine, but that is as it is. And his truck is just plastered with F. Trudeau stuff. It's just plastered with F. Trudeau stuff. That if he had a Confederate flag on that truck, I'd be like, yep, stands up, right? It's like completely that. And so I don't need to go back to Manitoba, man. And proof's actually in the pudding that the place where the Liberals are losing the most support is Ontario. That the Liberals are losing support in Ontario at a rapid rate. And I really do think that the thing, like, if I wanted to be kind to the people of Ontario, I think the thing that people are punishing more than anything is inaction. That maybe people do understand that they're sort of given the keys to the kingdom to the capitalists. Maybe they do understand that. But at least there's a promise of action. Whereas the Liberals are just doing nothing. Like, they're doing nothing. And moreover, they're washing their hands of it. Like, the Liberals have publicly said out loud in front of people that housing is a provincial issue. Like, then what are you for? If you're not going to respond to crises, then what are you for? Yep. People need to be much more lazy. Would equal a less dead planet. Yeah, I completely agree with that. What are we working so much for? Tinker, good to see you, my man, by the way. I hear Australia is a disaster. Highest housing costs plus high electricity costs. Canada's right there. Yep. Minimum wage in Australia is $23, though, unlike Canada or US. Yeah. Thought they were... Do you ever see people in thought they were losing a ton in Atlantic Canada? Yeah, they're losing everywhere, dude. Like, they're losing everywhere. Like, they're losing major strongholds, right? Yet Trudeau said privatizing healthcare in Ontario is innovation. Yep. Like, and I think there is... I've been using rage a lot, but I also think there is just sort of a sense of, like, oh, well, like, oh, if he's going to act like a conservative, then we might as well get the conservatives in, right? Like, if Trudeau's going to call privatization in Ontario innovation, then we might as well just be ruled by the conservatives, right? Like, at least that would be honest. Like, why bother pretending like we're not warmongering, psychopathic, privatization-mongering losers? Like, why bother pretending? We might as well just have those guys in, right? Yeah, 1.6% of rentals in Australia are affordable for someone on minimum wage. Yeah, this is turning into a full-on capitalist issue. Like, the capitalists are destroying us. The capitalists are abandoning us. And it's obviously happening on purpose. Matthias, good to see you, my man. Bread Cultist writes, you're joking. I never joke, Bread Cultist. I'm always telling you the truth 100% of the time. This is not a time for joking. Never joke. I mean, sometimes I do joke. I don't know what you're referring to, though, so... As if writes, Canada signed the UN Convention to guarantee the necessities of life, including housing. Canadians who talk about earning it are, of course, oblivious to that. I mean, I really think that if you're actually saying that people need to earn housing, that there is just something wrong with you. Like that's crazy. Like, there's something really wild about this belief system. that says housing, we should be able to withdraw housing from people. Like that, I can't think of a crazier thing to believe than to say that, like, yeah, food and shelter should not be a guarantee. What are you talking about? Like, what's the point of even having a government if it's not going to actually guarantee those things? Like that's like one of the basic justifications for the reason you have a government, is so that those things are actually in fact guaranteed, right? Like that's what security means. Like that's the whole point, you know? Like it's incredibly strange to me, this belief that says food and shelter should be withheld from people. I feel like there's something really dark and sinister inside of the mind of people who say that kind of stuff. Matthias say the oligarchs own all the housing and enjoy enormous bailouts every 5 to 10 years, which we pay for with our taxes. Therefore, we can never actually own housing. It's just for the oligarchs. Yeah, exactly. Right? Like it's wild to me that everybody's just like, yeah, bailouts for the rich, normal, that's fine. But if somebody wants a penny from the government, that's a handout and you're lazy. Like, how dim-witted can you get? They're spending $15 billion on useless F-35s and $300 billion for 15 useless warships for the next 20 years. Yeah, infinite money for war. Infinite money for war. You can constantly go to war and you don't need to justify it. You never, under any circumstances, need to justify war. Right? If you want to go destroy a tiny island nation, if you want to coup a government, if you want to funnel as much money as you possibly can into a global conflict that has like nuclear potential nuclear war attached to it, infinite money for that. You can spend as much money as you like, and if you spend hundreds of billions of dollars on it, your allies will still complain that you're not spending enough, right? But if you want to have an educated populace, right? If you want to transition into a green economy, if you want to build a transit system, if you want to improve the quality of life for your citizens, if you want to make sure that they have enough housing, if you want to make sure that that housing is affordable, you want to make sure there's a healthcare system, like all of that is, well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, how are you going to pay for that? So if you want to waste money just dropping bombs on people who can't fight back, infinite money. But if you actually want to build sustainable systems that actually pay for themselves over time, no, it's unaffordable. Like we're a backwards people, like straight up. That future generations will look at us and think, oh wow, they were backwards. Like they actually thought like up is down and down is up. Like they really thought in just this like backwards kind of a way. So, Adam McPherson, good to see you, man. Isn't the $23 minimum wage in Australia similar to Canada? Once cost of living is taken into consideration, minimum wage in Canada is double in the U.S., where they still use the federal $7.25 per hour. It's $6, maybe $6.50. I don't know the exact number, but $6. It's $16 here in Ontario. So it's less than in Australia. And when I've talked to Australians that have come here, and they're blown away by it. Like, but it's slightly better. Like, you're not incorrect, Adam. But I think it's getting into a splitting hairs sort of territory, frankly. So I'm going to read this article because it's loaded with a bunch of stuff. Like, one of my favorite things that's going on about the Ukraine war conversation is people are still duped into believing that, oh, it's unprovoked. Oh, it's unprovoked. Oh, the war in Russia was completely unprovoked, and they just went crazy. He's the new Hitler. Unprovoked war of aggression. War of aggression by Hitler, by Putin Hitler. And Gata Naranja says $15 minimum wage in California. Yeah, some of the blue states, like Seattle is like this too, have increased the minimum wage because they understand that increasing the minimum wage actually increases economic activity. If people have more money, they spend that money, right? The issue, of course, that happens is that if you increase the minimum wage, the psychopath class increases prices, and then they call it inflation, and then the Bank of Canada or the Federal Reserve back them and pretend like that's a natural phenomenon instead of just them gouging the populace. right? And that's your wage price spiral that they talk about. That if you increase wages, they increase prices because they're psychopaths. Like, that's all. It would be enough if they just didn't increase prices, right? Like, the wage price spiral only makes sense if you ignore the fact that they're also going, we've never made more money than this. Whoa, wow, profits are up an incredible amount. Yeah, because you jack prices. Like, what do you think? So yet another reason for why we need to remove the means of production from these people's hands, that they are psychopaths and should not be trusted. Speaking of psychopaths, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked an important chapter in 20th century history. Even though the Soviet Union hadn't yet collapsed, the once mighty rival to the U.S. stood by, and rather than use military troops, which were stationed in East Germany, Gorbachev criticized East Germany for being too slow to enact democratic reforms. While he voiced concerns on German unification, he agreed not just because of James Baker's verbal commitment not to expand NATO, on which a lot has been written, but also because he saw the Soviet Union as a stakeholder in collective security of Europe, collaborating with NATO to ensure democratic unified Europe, leading to German unification, including full gradual withdrawal of Soviet troops. However, despite Gorbachev's hopes, President George W. Bush was given assurances to his counterparts in West Germany and France that Soviet Union will have at best a nominal role and can't be allowed to revamp, and only NATO would continue to be the dominant player in Europe. This sentiment in U.S. foreign policy elites was best captured by the iconic article The Unipolar Moment by political commentator Charles Kotthammer, lavishing in a new world order without any rivals, and encouraging global hegemony through preemptive interventions to spread American values and prevent emergence of new rivals, and lamented the challenges as pacifism domestically, sometimes known as Vietnam Syndrome, derisively. The immediate post-Cold War world is not multipolar, it is unipolar. The center of world power is an unchallenged superpower, the United States, attended by its Western allies. The unipolar moment means that with the close of the century's three great northern civil wars, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, an ideologically pacified North seeks security and order by aligning its foreign policy behind that of the United States. The unipolar moment means that America has a unique responsibility to act as the world's policeman, and it can do so only by deterrence, not only by deterrence, but by intervention. The United States has a rare chance to exercise its benign hegemony over much of the world. The American hegemon has no great power enemies, an historical oddity of the first order. Yet it does face a serious threat to its dominance, indeed, to its essential security. It comes not from abroad, but from within. The danger is not that America will be too present in world affairs, but that it will withdraw prematurely or capriciously. The unipolar moment in foreign affairs, 1990. While this wasn't official policy doctrine, it's heavily influenced U.S. elites and was deployed in action in Iraq, 1991. But soon it was followed by actual policy documents codifying some of these realpolitik aims of U.S. as a new global hegemon in Defense Planning Guidance of 92. By then, Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, thus becoming known as Wolfowitz Doctrine. Our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere, that poses a threat to the order of that posed formerly by the Soviet Union. This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. The U.S. must show leadership necessary to establish and protect a new order that holds the promise of convincing potential competitors that they need not aspire to a greater role or pursue a more aggressive posture to protect their legitimate interests. In non-defense areas, we must account sufficiently for the interest of the advanced industrial nations to discourage them from challenging our leadership or seeking to overturn the established political and economic order. We must maintain the mechanism for deterring potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. While the U.S. cannot become the world's policeman by assuming responsibility for righting every wrong, we will retain the preeminent responsibility for addressing selectively those wrongs which threaten not only our interests, but those of our allies or friends, or which could seriously unsettle international relations. We continue to recognize that collectively the conventional forces of the states formerly comprising the Soviet Union retain the most military potential in all of Eurasia, and we do not dismiss the risks to stability in Europe from a nationalist backlash in Russia, or efforts to reincorporate into Russia the newly independent republics of Ukraine, Belarus, and possibly others. We must, however, be mindful that democratic change in Russia is not irreversible, and that despite its current travails, Russia will remain the strongest military power in Eurasia, and the only power in the world with the capability of destroying the United States. A leaked draft of Defense Planning of Guidance of 1992. As this was a leaked draft, the final published work was modified to remove the realpolitik language and use words like democracy and human rights. However, Wolfowitz would go on to have a long, notorious career, one of the key architects of Iraq's 2003 invasion, serving under George W. Bush, too, where finally Bush Doctrine, published as part of the National Security Strategy 2002 document, and later Quadrennial Defense Review of 2006, was more openly applied to contain overt hawkish language, reflecting the earlier doctrine, with core tenets being identified as preemptive strikes against potential enemies and promoting democratic regime change. So while the documents were publicly formalized in the 2000s, the groundwork for U.S. foreign policy had already been laid out in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall, even before the dissolution of the Soviet Union as an extension of the same principle from Cold War against Soviets known as containment. Notably, this policy was to be applied equally elsewhere in the Middle East or East Asia too, to prevent the rise of other regional powers. The simplest way to do that was to surround the countries, especially Russia, with military bases and even missiles. Moreover, this era also saw the formation and coalescing of multiple non-conservative organizations as think tanks in Washington, such as Project for the New American Century, by hawks like Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan, who introduced themselves in foreign affairs advocating America should pursue a vision of benevolent hegemony, as bold as Reagan in the 1970s, and wield its authority unabashedly, in the abstract itself. A large portion of that coalition joined the Bush administration and oversaw multiple military interventions, advocating for invading Iraq as early as 1998, and massive expansions of domestic surveillance states. Most of these rotate from one think tank to another, advocate for every war, are highly connected in political establishment, and get featured on mainstream U.S. media interviews constantly. In the book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, realist author Professor Jonathan Mearsheimer diagnoses in depth U.S. foreign policy through a pragmatic lens, examines the U.S. desire to prevent the rise of any political rival in Europe, including Russia, to maintain its hegemonic influence in the region. Mind you, he is not criticizing the strategy and is no pacifist. He just, like many realists, prefer talking about foreign policy openly, as a geopolitical chessboard, rather than some convoluted ideals, and believe the U.S. should focus on containing China rather than Russia. A lot of critics of the U.S. role in provocation to Russia have posited that the U.S. didn't do enough to pay attention to legitimate Russian national security concerns. However, the containment doctrine above, alongside statements from a lot of prominent officials over the years, show that the U.S. not just ignored the concerns, but was very intentional in further undermining those concerns, and to an extent sees the Russian escalation into Ukraine as an opportunity to finally expedite its project to weaken Russia. As noted earlier, the best place to get an insight into the actual actions undertaken would be in the previous article, in the last section. One notable book highlighting this is The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives, by past National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the architects of successfully bogging down the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, where he talks at length on the importance of maintaining a favorable balance of power to avoid any single state from exerting hegemonic control over the Eurasian landmass, thus helping preserve U.S. preeminence. He asserted the importance of containing Russian power by supporting its neighbors in Ukraine, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. On Ukraine, he mentioned, Ukraine, a new and important space on the Eurasian chessboard, is a geopolitical pivot because its very existence as an independent country helps to transform Russia. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. However, if Moscow regains control over Ukraine with its 52 million people and major resources, as well as access to the Black Sea, Russia automatically again regains the wherewithal to become a powerful imperial state, spanning Europe and Asia. There are many further comments from various elected officials, political commentators, think tanks, security officials, reflecting a combination of disdain for Russian concerns, as well as desires to see the country cornered and weakened, as well as submit to Western domination. Here are some examples. From 1997, then Senator Joe Biden. I had one interesting conversation with Zyuganov. They talked about, I don't want this NATO expansion. They know it's not in their security interests, and on, and said, well, if you do that, we may have to look to China. And I couldn't help using the colloquial expression from my state by saying to Zyuganov, lots of luck in your senior year. You know, good luck. And if that doesn't work, try Iran. I'm serious. I said that to them. And they know I knew they knew. Everybody knows it's not an option. And everybody knows. Every one of those leaders acknowledges and needs, and they resent it. But they need to look west. Further, in 2009, when Biden was vice president, he penned an op-ed asserting a weakened Russia will bend to the U.S., also dismissing Russia's red lines around Georgia or Ukraine, explaining his rationale as, the reality is the Russians are where they are. They have a shrinking population base, they have a withering economy, they have a banking sector and structure that's not likely to be able to withstand the next 15 years. They're in a situation where the world is changing before them, and they're clinging to something in the past that is not sustainable. With its population base shrinking and the economy withering, would have to make accommodations to the West on a wide range of national security issues. Robert Kagan, one of the founders of the above think tanks, wrote a book, The Return of History and the End of Dreams, in 2008, where he asserted, as long as Russia remains strong, stable, and cohesive, no American alliance system in Europe will be possible. It's that simple. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton asserted in 2011, claiming economic integration and union initiated by Russia was re-Sovietization and needs to be stopped. With that logic, of course, EU, let alone NATO, would be Pax Americana or even Britannica. There's a move to re-Soviet the region, and it's not going to be called that. It's going to be called some customs union. It will be called Eurasian Union and all of that. But let's make no mistake about it. We know what the goal is, and we're trying to figure out effective ways to slow down or prevent it. The Council on Foreign Relations published a book called Containing Russia in 2018, recommending sanctions, cyber warfare, encircling Russia further in Europe. Ukrainian PM Yulia Tomenenko penned articles with the same title in 2007. Here's a map of U.S. bases near Russia. Man, it's wild that Russia would feel threatened, right? Why did Russia put its border so near all of these United States military bases, right? It's weird that Russia would feel so threatened. During Trump's first impeachment hearings in 2009, Adam Schiff, head of House Intelligence Committees, quoted, "The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there, so we don't have to fight Russia here." In the aftermath of the Russian invasion in 2022, more of the veneer has been dropped at instances with Biden, now president, asserting Putin cannot remain in power, signaling regime change. In 2023, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham suggested assassination of Putin as a method. 2012 Republican presidential nominee and current U.S. Senator Mitt Romney similarly admitted in a video, while trying to rationalize spending on Ukraine to his constituents, Russia is a geopolitical adversary, and the U.S. is helping to deplete the Russian military through its aid to Ukraine. He says Russia is China's only real ally, so weakening Russia is also an effective way to weaken China. More recently, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was crisp on U.S. goals, too, admitting to weakening Russia, while Anthony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, reiterated it, stating, "I think the Secretary said it very well. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. Russia should not have the capability to very quickly reproduce the force and equipment that had been lost in Ukraine." Republican Senator and 2024 presidential candidate Tim Scott said in an interview, "America's vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we do that, we make sure our home front is safer. This means evaluating threats to home front in our country. The most immediate military threat that could happen is Russia. You look at their sixth-generation jets. You look at their hypersonic weapons. You look at their nuclear arsenal. Everything that we do that degrades the Russian military is good for America." This was Tim Scott in Turning Point interview with Tucker Carlson. While these are hawkish elected officials still dropping the mask and signaling real intent, some other adjacent think tanks have been even more explicit. Here is commentator Matt Yagel-Silas saying the quiet part out loud. "This is actually a really good deal for us. Basically, NATO equipment and Ukrainian lives are being traded for Russian equipment and Russian lives, which leaves NATO coming out ahead. That's doubly true because NATO is much richer than Russia, so we win a long-term gain of everyone explode their weapons as fast as they can make them." Richard Hanania from a think tank wrote, "There is no good ending for the Russian people that doesn't recognize their entire culture and civilizational model has failed, and the country has to be remade along Western lines. Tough pill to swallow, but every other path is toward certain disaster. However, the actions have gone beyond rhetoric and willingness to admit the intentions with actual on-the-ground effort to not just seek more combat and not peace, but actually go out of their way to sabotage peace negotiations. First, this was reported when Boris Johnson, then the Prime Minister of the UK, urged Zelensky to not sign a peace agreement, saying the West wouldn't sign on to a bad peace. Putin revealed the negotiation documents from Istanbul last year in a meeting with African leaders signed by Russia and Ukrainian delegations, before it was skirted by Boris Johnson. Instead, Johnson insisted this should be used as an opportunity to press Putin. Johnson brought two simple messages to Kiev. The first is that Putin is a war criminal. He should be pressured, not negotiated with. And the second is that even if Ukraine is ready to sign some agreements on guarantees with Putin, they are not. Similarly, Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, admitted in an interview that he was trying to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine, including directly having reached out to Zelensky and Putin, but US, Germany, and France stopped the deal because they believed it was essential to keep striking Putin. More recently, when China proposed a plan to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine, U.S. officials immediately expressed skepticism of any ceasefire being signed, with National Security spokesperson John Kirby stating, "A ceasefire is now effectively the ratification of Russian conquest and would, in effect, recognize Russia's gains and its attempt to conquer its neighbor's territory by force. We do not believe that this is a step towards a just and durable peace." There are countless other similar statements, often disguised in language around democracy and human rights, which add context to the often cited provocation to suggest it didn't just happen to be the U.S. wanting to add countries to an expanding military alliance out of charitable goals, but is mentioned in the above doctrines and pronouncements of high-level state officials and think tanks. The goal has been to contain Russia, to continue the preservation of unipolar moment and U.S. as a benevolent hegemony. The above, however, just focuses on the U.S. desire to explicitly admit, at times, to contain Russia and other powers, which led to expanding NATO's alliance. But the project of containment went beyond, by funding color revolutions and regime changes in neighboring countries to bring staunchly anti-Russian candidates to office and even attempt to do so in Russia at multiple times. Color revolutions to cause regime change. Beyond expanding NATO, there was another methodology which became more pervasive and the major source of Russian anxiety. Interfering in Russia domestically and funding protesters in neighboring countries with the goal of replacing the regime there with one much more hostile to Russia. This culminated in the 2014 overthrow of democratically elected Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. The first successful template for this was in Serbia, where few months after NATO's bombing of Yugoslavia, an unpopular Slobodan Milosevic was overthrown by a lot of protesters. A lot of civic society groups came together in the bulldozer revolution, but there was a lot of funding by U.S. NGOs, such as Open Society Foundations, run by billionaire George Soros, as well as covert funding from U.S. State Departments and NEDs. One key figure here was the U.S. ambassador in Belgrade, Richard Miles. Soon after he left to serve as the United States ambassador in Georgia, and with the help of the same funders, helped in the successful overthrow of Soviet-era leader Edward Shevardnadze in the Rose Revolution in 2003 by funding activist organizations and students. A similar attempt was financed in Belarus to overthrow Lukashenko, where the U.S. installed as ambassador Michael Kozak, well known for having conducted similar regime change operations in multiple Latin American countries, but didn't succeed. Meanwhile, it did succeed in the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan, 2005. U.S. leaders made no secret in all of these incidences of their choices either, loudly advocating for the existing regime to be toppled and advocating for their replacements, often in the name of democracy and human rights. While in all three above examples there was some credence, the most irksome meddling happened in Ukraine in 2004, when the results of the elections were challenged, and protesters in the Orange Revolution funded prominent U.S. politicians expressed the desire to have Lukashenko as the winner, and OCSE interfered, calling the elections rigged, thus causing another round of elections, where the favored candidate did indeed win, after losing initially. Besides, there were some attempts to interfere with Russia too. In 1996, the United States helped Yeltsin win the election, despite that there was a lot of criticism and pressure leveled at Russia, especially after the Second Chechenian War erupted in 1999. When Yeltsin retired in 1999, the U.S. made it clear they didn't support the election of Vladimir Putin. Moreover, they continuously criticized Putin's election in 2004 onwards, from John McCain, George Bush, Madeleine Albright, Biden. The Snow Revolution in Russia was one of the pivotal turning points within Russia. 3 years of protests following the 2011 Russian legislative elections, and there were many allegations of funding and instigating protests, including by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. It was indisputable that leading Western organizations made statements supporting protesters, opposition increasing the fury of the Russian elite. So, while there was constant incursions into Russia's own processes, as well as supporting regime change in neighboring countries, the straw which broke the camel's back was the 2014 overthrow of Yanukovych. Ukraine had seen him lose in 2004 with results overturned, and then win in 2010, reflecting the wishes of the pro-Russian Ukrainians, but then toppled by force. What was worse, the U.S. left its imprints all over, from sanctions on previous governments, to top-level U.S. officials joining protesters calling for the overthrow of the government, to helping decide the successor, and even deciding which prosecutors to fire. The post-Maidan government was intent on de-Russification from the early stages, and here the threat started moving beyond losing influence to actual threats on Russian soil, with Ukraine's proximity historic value, and having it flooded with high-grade U.S. weapons. While there are better pieces to which to go in much more detail on U.S. involvement in 2014's overthrow, I will highlight some of the core points and the events preceding to it. When Yukановich took office, he halted the process of Ukraine seeking NATO, stating, "There is no insurgency to join the group." In 2011, polls showed popular opinion till 2013 showed only 20% for NATO, with 60% against. However, he was still very interested in joining EU customs unions, but European Commissioner President Jose Manuel Barroso made it clear, one country cannot at the same time be a member of a customs union and be in a deep common free trade area with the European Union. This is not possible. When Russia realized the EU had forced an option for Ukraine, they started using their own pressure tactics, such as increased customs checks, causing damage to Ukrainian economy, being the country's largest trading partner. Moreover, the EU imposed a lot of conditions on the Ukrainian parliament, which didn't pass. Yukановich suspended EU customs unions, which precipitated the multi-month protests by Euromaidan protesters. Senators John McCain and Chris Murphy of the U.S. visited Kiev during this period and sided with protesters. They applied crippling sanctions on Ukraine too, which according to Murphy, agreed was a key factor in helping him be toppled. The head of National Endowment of Democracy, the NED funded by the U.S. State Department, was remarking how the U.S. should stand up to Russia, and Ukraine will be the biggest prize, with the aim of containing Russia due to its large population, a strategic location, and a history of cultural and political ties with both Russia and Europe, and will be a historic moment that will change the balance of power in the region and challenge Russia's dominance. The Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, remarked $5 billion was spent to promote democracy and institutions in Ukraine since 1991 to help join NATO. CIA Chief John Brennan visited Kiev in the immediate aftermath of the overthrow. More importantly, the leaked tapes between Nuland and U.S. ambassadors to Ukraine, Jeffrey Payette, showed discussion of who to install as the next president of Ukraine, and that indeed turned out to be true. While Germany and France held multiple rounds of talks with Russia and Ukraine to broker ceasefire in the Minsk Accords, since leaving office, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has remarked, at the time, it brought calm and gave Ukraine, for example, a lot of time, 7 years, to develop into what it is today. Similarly, French President at the time, François Hollande, admitted in 2022. The Minsk agreements stopped the Russian offensive for a while. Since 2014, Ukraine has strengthened its military posture. Indeed, the Ukrainian army was completely different from that of 2014. It was better trained and equipped. It is the merit of the Minsk agreements to have given the Ukrainian army this opportunity. Moreover, in a dubious call with a Russian prankster posing as ex-Ukrainian President Poroshenko, Holland admitted to using the Minsk agreements to buy time and somewhat of influence in helping overthrow of Yukановich. The above set of events paints a pretty grim picture of the U.S. and other Western powers' involvements, where not only did they create initial pressure on Yukановich, but then funded and aided protesters, and when the government was overthrown using the deployment of various tactics, helped architect the new government, as well as the negotiations for ceasefire, not with the intention of ceasing hostilities, but with the aim of buying time for Ukraine and helping it be more ready and militarized with U.S. weapons when the time eventually comes to face off Russia. These events, in addition to the doctrines described above, signal the intent to create hostile neighbors, to encircle perceived adversaries, and use them as well militarized launch pads. What is the end goal for all of this? One of the reasonable questions out of this would be, why go through all of these machinations, expenditures over multiple years? What is the end game? One simple observation would be to just have a compliant Russia, willing to work together rather than opposed. However, that claim is not strong enough, as U.S. had Soviet and Russian leaders willing to work together. Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and even Putin in the early years. So, what was it which necessitated the extra effort when Soviet and Russian leaders had leaders willing to work together? The answer can be understood through the above doctrines. It's not just sufficient to have leaders willing to work together, but also to prevent the rise of alternative regional powers. The Soviets and then Russia, even though weak in the late 80s and 90s, given sufficient time, could rebuild itself to be a regional power, assert military dominance, and remilitarize. Russia already interfered in Moldova and Georgia in the early 90s. What would be worse is if Russia was able to develop deep relationships with the rest of Europe, and one day possibly create a powerful alternative in the European continent, not necessitating the presence of U.S. troops and possibly undermining U.S. business interests, one of the main reasons Nord Stream pipelines had irked U.S. leaders so much. The surest way of implementing the doctrine to avoid resurgent Russia was a demilitarization, similar to how the U.S. and U.K. did to Germany after World War I, preventing them from producing and importing weapons, war materials, or conscription in the Treaty of Versailles, or Japan after World War II. However, given that the Soviet Union was still a nuclear power, there was much more constraints on imposing such restrictions overtly. Thus, a strategy of continued containment was necessary by expanding military alliances closer to Russia, and here, the best template to follow was the Soviets getting bogged down in Afghanistan in 1979, in a 10-year quagmire leading to bleeding the country, causing internal strife, and eventual collapse of the Soviet Union into 15 republics. While the U.S. never fired a shot directly at the Soviets during this entire period, its funding of rebels in Pakistan and Afghanistan was successful to get the Soviets bogged down in a war of attrition, with sophisticated U.S. weapons finally being able to be used directly on Soviet soldiers through Mujahideen fighters, which was the plan all along, as per Brzezinski, Carter's NSA. Moreover, it isolated the Soviet Union, with its Chinese alliance collapsed and losing all support in the Islamic world, thus appropriately dubbed Soviet's Vietnam War. The U.S. Department of Defense Representative Walter B. Slocum asked if there was value in keeping the Afghan insurgency going, sucking the Soviets into a Vietnamese quagmire. When asked to clarify this remark, Slocum explained, well, the whole idea was that if the Soviets decided to strike at this Afghanistan, we had every interest in making sure that they got stuck. A memo from the National Intelligence Officer warned, covert action would raise the cost of the Soviets and inflame Muslim opinion against them in many countries. The risk was that a substantial U.S. covert aid program could raise the stakes and induce the Soviets to intervene more directly and vigorously than otherwise intended. Thus, after the years of regime changes in Russia's neighbors, expanding NATO and installing missiles in Romania and Czech, the escalation in Ukraine after the Russian invasion in 2022 has provided the perfect opportunity. Not only is NATO able to flood a neighbor with high-grade weapons and utilize all its advanced weapons on Russian military targets and bog it down in another war of attrition, but it also allows it to isolate Russia completely in the Western world, thus preventing any overtures between Russia and Germany. Further, a solidification of the Western alliance also reduces the independent negotiating leverage of European nations with China, U.S.'s primary adversary in terms of influence. Within Russia, the hope is that the economic damage caused by the sanctions would allow factions within Russia to help overthrow Putin, and ideally installed with a pro-Western puppet, not Wagner. Or alternatively, the nation would just disintegrate into further republics as a repeat of the 1979 war. This helps in the complete destruction of war-making capabilities, destruction of infrastructure, and in the case of a collapse, a weak, compliant puppet government. The semblance of concern for human rights and democracy. Similar to taking Russian concerns for the rights of Eastern Ukrainians, which legitimately have suffered, especially since 2014, I would extend the same courtesy to the U.S. in actually taking their concerns regarding democracy, human rights, and sovereignty at face value. After all, I don't dispute the assertion that nations in former Warsaw Pacts and the Soviet Union did feel legitimate senses of threat from a big neighbor, Russia. The question is, was there any legitimate concern on the part of the US or the UK about the plight of citizens, or was it just a pawn towards containment? Exhibit A. NATO was legitimately being expanded to promote democracy and stability. One way to make a charitable interpretation of NATO's concern for democracy would be made by analyzing the prerequisites to entry for nations, including tackling corruption internally and promoting democracy. This was in addition to opening up the countries economically with loans from the IMF and the World Bank, in theory freeing resources from hands of state to potentially allowing countries to thrive under capitalistic reforms. Economic integration with the EU, including the visa-free travel between certain Eastern European countries, has helped alleviate poverty in these countries, with Poland and the Czech Republic being prominent examples. While these are fair points, the skepticism to these claims would be similar to the ones the U.S. espouses for Chinese loans under the One Belt, One Road initiative as debt trap diplomacy. Namely, the growth which comes from the development doesn't accrue as much to the local population as to U.S. contractors such as Bechtel, Fluoril, or construction oil companies such as Chevron, Exxon for oil and gas exploration, and financial institutions like J.P. Morgan for aid. And these local winners are replaced by government authorities to handpick oligarchs by the U.S. When debt repayments fail, it leads to austerity measures, dubbed as economic shock therapy, and often contracting out natural resources and military bases, similar legitimate criticisms for Chinese debts. While these criticisms are true, it's also very true that these countries seek these reforms of their own accord, and despite gains being unequal, it does improve the GDP and overall quality of living. So if economics was the parameter, one can even make a legitimate argument for concern of economic well-being of citizens in these countries through integration into the EU. However, it's worth remembering NATO is not an economic alliance, but a military alliance. So it's worth also analyzing whether installing bases, sponsoring regime changes, and invading countries was also born out of possible goodwill. Exhibit B. The U.S. legitimately cared about human rights in Eastern Europe. Now that I have analyzed the potential charitable intentions behind NATO's enlargement, I want to assess if a similar charitable interpretation stands to scrutiny to multiple U.S. or NATO-funded or backed invasions and regime changes in the area after the Cold War, namely in Bosnia, Serbia, Georgia, and Ukraine. Of course, multiple books have been written analyzing U.S.'s global meddling in other countries and whether advertised standards of democracy, human rights are legitimate. One only has to look at blatant examples in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel, and a bloody history in Latin America and East Asia to have skepticism on the advertised reasons. But rather than delve into larger U.S. global roles, I will focus on the specific set of countries and the interventions mentioned. Let's start with the controversial ones. The NATO bombing of Spretska in 95 and Yugoslavia in 99, where one can agree that the rights of Bosnians and Kosovar Albanians were infringed upon, including the murder of civilians. Firstly, I will reiterate that in both situations, NATO targeted Serbian populations first when the rebel group was fighting for independence against Bosniak majorities, and in the second time when Kosovar rebels were fighting for independence from Serbians, which itself is questionable, without even going into recent declassified documents discussing the secret role of U.S. top-level officials working with Bosniaks to skid negotiations. However, if the rights of minorities were somehow a legitimate concern for NATO, the double standard gets exposed in Ukraine itself, where after 2014 not only has the organization looked away, but actively funded the suppression of rights and even killings of ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the East. Bringing attention to the plight of these people has been maligned as Kremlin agents. Moreover, the U.S. showed no interest at all in negotiating for the Minsk agreements, specifically in clauses which spoke about an autonomous Donbass, with its linguistic rights enshrined. In a similar vein, concerns around Yukounovich firing on protesters and being corrupt, while true, seemed less genuine, compared to U.S. indifference to Poroshenko's semi-authoritarian rule in Eastern Europe. Corruption charges labeled him or Zelensky's own corruption. Similarly, for the concerns and funding of the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003, one can be somewhat sympathetic about the lack of democracy in Georgia under Edward Shevardnadze, given he was a Soviet-era leader who obtained power through a coup, overthrowing the dissident Soviet leader, who had his position maintained in the early years with the help of the Russian troops before winning democratic elections with allegations of rigging. However, his successor after the overthrow, pro-Western Mikhail Saakashvili, who would go on to be governor of Odessa in Ukraine, also engaged in corruption, cracked down on protesters, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Despite expressing concerns, the U.S. continued backing him and criticized his trial. Moreover, the similar funding of the 2004 Orange Revolution fails the smell test, completely unlike the Georgian case, as the predecessor Kuchma won elections democratically, and just claims of rigged elections by one party doesn't warrant foreign interference, except the U.S. didn't want party of regions to win. So while it's perfectly possible, even in this small sample, Sept, to justify every time the U.S. criticizes someone as corrupt and authoritarian as actually violating human rights, irrespective of whether they were democratically elected, and criticize every pro-Western leader who is prosecuted for corruption and deny their human rights violations, at one point to an observer who is not part of the bubble, it becomes evident that actions mirror much more of a geopolitical containment strategy as opposed to any legitimate concern about human rights. Thus, to reiterate my view on humanitarian interventions, irrespective of who says it, I barely put stock into it as the legitimate cause of conflicts, as it's always superseded by geopolitical ambitions. The threat of domestic interference. While I am dismissive of human rights concerns as justification for conducting international covert operations, I don't treat legitimate national security threats in the same bucket. That's why I deeply looked at Russian concerns at being cornered and surrounded by Western missiles. So while one can dismiss the legitimacy of U.S. concerns about Eastern Europeans' feeling the constant pull of Russia, it's worth examining whether U.S. legitimately felt threat on its homeland from Russia. Just like there was a celebration of the unipolar moment in the U.S., one of the most prominent authors in Russia was Alexander Dugin, writing Foundations of Geopolitics, advocating for Neo-Eurasianism, Russian revanchism to rebuild empire through alliances, and conquest to defeat the Atlanticist empire. This wasn't a fringe view either, as even though crushed by Yeltsin in the 1993 constitutional crisis, the Hawks were a significant portion of the Duma, and were favorites to win the 1996 election, before the U.S. intervened to help Yeltsin's election campaign. Moreover, independent Russia had already asserted itself as the savior for the Russian people outside its border by intervening in Moldova and the Georgian civil wars, as well as leading bombing campaigns in Chechnya domestically to subdue separatism. So while they weren't indicating an attack on the U.S. directly, they were in essence attacking U.S. interests of being the dominant player in Europe by willing to expand its sphere of influence and be willing to use military means occasionally. However, there were also incidents which could have increased suspicion about Russian motives and reach when Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen were discovered as spies who had infiltrated U.S. spy ranks for multiple years, giving information to Russia and working from FSB days in the Soviet Union. A few years later, Illegals program was uncovered by FBI as a Russian spy ring, convicting 10 Russian nationals. Furthermore, Russia undermined U.S.'s ability to extradite Edward Snowden, which, though immoral, U.S. saw as a national interest issue, after leaks by granting him asylum. Putin's government also prevented the U.S.'s ability to conduct regime change operations in Syria by confronting U.S.-funded rebels head-on when Russia intervened militarily in the Syrian civil war. The final irreversible decline happened in the aftermath of allegations of interference in the 2016 elections by U.S. intelligence agencies, when U.S. perception of Russia interfering in its domestic process although there is a lot to be said on the whole Russiagate saga, brought the US on a collision course and intent to weaken Russian regimes further, although arguably by then all the major hostile events had already taken place, including the fateful overthrow in Ukraine in 2014. The clash of civilizations. One of the less talked interpretations of the broader 100-year war, which escalated at the fall of the Russian Empire in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution, is the rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union, and now Russia, is a continuation of the Great Game, which had just ended 10 years back in 1907 with the Anglo-Russian Convention. For those unfamiliar, the Great Game was a century-long proxy battle between the British and Russian empires, mostly in the 19th century, for influence in various parts of the world, primarily in Asia, using countries there as their playground. So when World War I ended, and the US emerged as one of the most powerful winners, the US took on the mantle of defenders of the Anglo Empire and interests, but in a less overt way, rather than feuding over ideologies and by instilling puppet regimes as opposed to outright conquest. While it might sound surprising today, even the British Empire portrayed the conflict as a clash of values, defender of Western civilization, democracy, free trade, and human rights against a despotic, expansionist, and backward power, the Russian Empire, that threatened the stability and security of Asia and Europe. This is, of course, as an aside to the colonial history, under the auspices of the white man's burden, as a civilizing mission for other countries. This has been discussed a lot, until after the end of the Cold War, most prominently by Samuel Huntington in his book, The Clash of Civilizations, in 1994. He surmised that future wars after the fall of the Soviet Union won't be much about nation-states, but rather between religions and cultures. One of the fundamental differences was coded under terms like non-Western civilizations. His primary focus was on Islam and China, being at odds with Western civilization's emphasis on human rights, freedom, and democracy. He bucketed Russia as part of Orthodox civilization, distinct from Western civilization, with different values, and leading to conflicts down the line, including internal ones within Ukraine. None of this is new philosophy. However, by saying the quiet part out loud, he coined the term, which has been used since time immemorial across cultures, as battles have changed pretexts from religion, culture, to some supposed principles or ideologies. And this is where the historic and contemporary battle with Russia, first the Great Game, followed by Cold War and now post-Cold War containment, finds the least talked about explanation, which, however, has a sufficiently long history. The resentment to having a semi-Asiatic backwater become a dominant power in Europe, the cradle of Western civilization of all places. There is a very long history to this, which might be the subject of its own post, but in a nutshell, it all goes back to the fall of the Kievan Rus to the Mongols in the 12th century, and subsequent 300-year rule by the Golden Horde on Russian lands. Multiple prominent European and U.S. leaders have openly voiced disdain for Russians along ethnic lines of being Asiatic, Mongol, and undeserving of equal status, ranging from French leaders like Napoleon, Charles de Gaulle, British Prime Ministers Benjamin Disraeli, William Gladstone, Winston Churchill, to Nazi leaders like Goebbels, who boldly proclaimed Slavs as Untermenschen. Famously, George Patton in 1945 said, while stating in an intent to invade the Soviets, "I have difficulty in understanding the Russian is that we do not take cognizance of the fact that he is not a European, but an Asiatic, and therefore thinks deviously. We can no more understand a Russian than a Chinaman or a Japanese, and from what I have seen of them, I have no particular desire to understand them, except to ascertain how much lead or iron it takes to kill them. In addition to his other Asiatic characteristics, the Russian has no regard for human life, and is an all-out son of a bitch, barbarian, and chronic drunk." As recently as 2013, John McCain voiced a similar sentiment. There's no doubt that Ukraine is of vital importance to Putin. I think it was Kissinger, I'm not sure, said that Russia, without Ukraine, it's an Eastern power. With Ukraine, it's a Western power. This is the beginning of Russia, right here in Kiev. So while there was non-trivial acknowledgement of some reporters saying the quiet part out loud in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and shedding tears over the different nature of the crime with blonde and blue-eyed people, as opposed to uncivilized nations, the part which hasn't got sufficient acknowledgement is this conception, which has existed over centuries, and is mostly sugar-coated under grand odes to democracy and human rights, is the part where Western powers have seen Russia as a non-European power, and perceived Kiev to be the border of pure Europe. Thus, adding to the indignation is the sense of an Asiatic power invading a European country. Recent articles, like Russia turns to its Asian past, leave no room for speculation on a prominent ways the Western elite still perceive the world for non-pure Westerners. There are few offhand examples to reflect a trope which has been forever been at the back of a lot of the democracy and human rights tropes, distinguishing Russia as being on the wrong side of the border of European civilization, and its insistence on trying to negotiate with historic European powers on equal terms has irked them for a while. That said, I want to clarify, while I feel this might be a dimension, by far the largest dimension is simple geopolitics, looking out for strategic goals and national security interests to preserve global hegemony and avoid the rise of regional powers. Conclusions. The situation within Ukraine wasn't idyllic before the Russian invasion. There was an ethnic fault line which manifested in various elections, and finally in 2014, the overthrow of Yanukovych started a one-way descent of the rights of ethnic Russians and an ongoing civil war in Donbass. Thus, in a way, it's not too separate from the civil wars in the Middle East, followed by intervention by larger players, by picking a side in internal conflicts. That said, Russia does bear significant culpability for its actions and suffering on Ukrainian nationals after a large-scale escalation of the conflict. Not only has Russia seen Ukraine and Belarus consistently as part of its indivisible sphere of influence, but prominent leaders have continued downplaying Ukrainian identity, including calling for its outright destruction during the war. Despite the above, a series of bilateral disputes around gas, the Black Sea Naval Fleet, Crimea, and the war on Donbass, Russia tried a lot of diplomatic means to get regional autonomy for Donbass. However, none of this stopped 30 years of onslaught of NATO, especially U.S., carrying out unilateral actions, funding the overthrow of governments willing to work with Russia, and inching closer to covert Ukraine into an anti-Russian neighbor state to be used as a missile launch pad. The lack of caring about Russian interests was no accident, and containing Russia was a strategic U.S. goal to prevent the rise of Russia as a regional power. While one can argue there are goals varying from benevolent to promoting democracy to genuine concerns on Russian intervention to sinister around perceived incompatibility with the rise of Asiatic powers, the chief goal, by far, documented over a long period, has been plain old containment to prevent any challenge to global hegemony and the rise of alternate power centers. This created an uncomfortable dynamic for Russia, initially trying to be a partner of NATO, only to realize there were limits to the U.S. willingness to pay any heed to their concerns, and then find themselves at the receiving end of being cornered, much beyond they ever were at the height of the Cold War, with adding neighboring countries to a hostile alliance, willing to back it up with constant warfare, and promoting regime change whenever it didn't happen organically. Eventually, after Biden's re-election and an escalation, trends started seeming irreversible towards Ukraine being a full-fledged anti-Russia state with any domestic dissent suppressed and unable to succeed with domestic means and proxy warfare. Russia invaded in the hopes of overthrowing Zelensky's regime, and when incapable of doing that, to liberate more land in Donbass as independent, to improve negotiating positions with NATO. Unfortunately, for them, NATO has shown no appetite for negotiation, as US is content with fighting Russia in Ukraine than in US, thus bleeding it and using this war to galvanize its alliance with the EU, to be used against China too in the future, which will be a different post. Whew. That was a bit longer than I was expecting, honestly. That was a bit longer than I was expecting. I was at that for a little bit of time. I'm glad I read that, though. It's good to see. It's good to see that more and more people are beginning to catch up with the Canadian commie. It's good to see that more and more people are beginning to catch up with the Canadian commie. I could put this in the Discord for you, my man. That's easy to do. Articles, and boom. Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, hit the bells, hit the whistles, do all the stuff, send the thing my way, do what you can, do what you like, do what you want, right? Like the channel, tell people I exist. Tell people I exist. Tell people more and more that there are people out there who are willing to sift through and try to find the truth behind what is actually going on and how we're actually acting in the world. Because one of the things that I think about all the time is that people have asked me, like, don't you think that Russia and China are also doing bad things out there in the world? And undoubtedly, right, they're humans, they're people. But I don't live in China. I don't live in Russia. I don't live in these places. I don't have any influence there. That if the goal for humanity is to live at peace, is to find a way to live at peace with one another, then, as conservatives tend to say, it begins at home. And if we have any influence in the world whatsoever, certainly it is the influence that we have within our own countries. And that if we would like for there to be less war in the world, then we need to begin by ceasing warring ourselves and ceasing this warfare and ceasing this bloodthirst that has very clearly taken us over. Very clearly taken us over. Oh. I hope you guys are all doing really well out there. I think I'm going to, after that big long read, if there's anybody still even listening, how many of you are even out there after that? 10 people? Not surprised. God bless you guys for being here. I appreciate it. God bless each and every one of you. I hope you guys are all doing really well out there. I think I'm going to draw this one to a close because that article was a bit more taxing than I was expecting. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. The billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.